T1. 2, Secretary. The term Secretary means the Secretary of Agriculture. Section 1108, Pandemic EBT Program. Section 1101 of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, 7 U.S.C. 2011 Note Public Law 116-127 is amended 1. In subsection A, by striking during fiscal years 2020 and 2021 and inserting in any school year in which there is a public health emergency designation, and B, by inserting or in a covered summer period following a school session after in session. 2. In subsection G, by striking during fiscal year 2020 the and inserting the. 3. In subsection H1A, by inserting either after at least one child enrolled in such a covered child care facility, and B, by inserting or a Department of Agriculture grant-funded nutrition assistance program in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, Puerto Rico, or American Samoa before shall be eligible to receive assistance. 4. By redesignating subsections I and J as subsections J and K respectively. 5. By inserting after subsection H the following. 1. Emergencies during summer. The Secretary of Agriculture may permit a state agency to extend a state agency plan approved under subsection B for not more than 90 days for the purpose of operating the plan during a covered summer period, during which time schools participating in the school lunch program under the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Act or the school breakfast program under Section 4 of the Child Nutrition Act of 1966, 42 U.S.C. 1773, and covered child care facilities shall be deemed closed for purposes of this section. 6. In subsection J, as so redesignated, A, by redesignating paragraphs 2 through 6 as paragraphs 3 through 7 respectively. B, by inserting after paragraph 1 the following. 2, covered summer period. The term covered summer period means a summer period that follows a school year during which there was a public health emergency designation. And C, in paragraph 5 as so redesignated, by striking or another coronavirus with pandemic potential. And 7, in subsection K as so redesignated, by inserting federal agencies before state agencies. Title II, Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. Subtitle A, Education Matters. Part 1, Department of Education. Section 2001, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available through the Education Stabilization Fund, there is appropriated to the Department of Education for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $125,804,800,000 to remain available through September 30th, 2023 to carry out this section. B, grants. From funds provided under subsection A, the Secretary shall make grants to each state educational agency in accordance with this section. C, allocations to states. The amount of each grant under subsection B shall be allocated by the Secretary to each state in the same proportion as each state received under Part A of Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 in the most recent fiscal year. D, subgrants to local educational agencies. 1, in general, each state shall allocate not less than 87.5% of the grant funds awarded to the state under this section as subgrants to local educational agencies, including charter schools that are local educational agencies in the state, in proportion to the amounts of funds such local educational agencies and charter schools that are local educational agencies received under Part A of Title I of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 in the most recent fiscal year. 2, availability of funds. Each state shall make allocations under paragraph 1 to local educational agencies in an expedited and timely manner, and to the extent practicable, not later than 60 days after the receipt of such funds. E, uses of funds. A local educational agency that receives funds under this section, 1, shall reserve not less than 20% of such funds to address learning loss through the implementation of evidence-based interventions such as summer learning or summer enrichment, extended day, comprehensive after-school programs, or extended school year programs, and ensure such interventions respond to students' academic, social, and emotional needs and address the disproportionate impact of the coronavirus on the student subgroups described in section 1111B2, B11 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, 20 USC 6311, B2, B11, students experiencing homelessness, and children and youth in foster care, and
2, shall use the remaining funds for any of the following. A, any activity authorized by the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. B, any activity authorized by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. C, any activity authorized by the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act. D, any activity authorized by the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act of 2006. E, coordination of preparedness and response efforts of local educational agencies with state, local, tribal, and territorial public health departments and other relevant agencies to improve coordinated responses among such entities to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. F, activities to address the unique needs of low-income children or students, children with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, students experiencing homelessness, and foster care youth, including how outreach and service delivery will meet the needs of each population. G, developing and implementing procedures and systems to improve the preparedness and response efforts of local educational agencies. H, training and professional development for state staff of the local educational agency on sanitation and minimizing the spread of infectious diseases. I, purchasing supplies to sanitize and clean the facilities of a local educational agency, including buildings operated by such agency. J, planning for, coordinating, and implementing activities during long-term closures, including providing meals to eligible students, providing technology for online learning to all students, providing guidance for carrying out requirements under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and ensuring other educational services can continue to be provided consistent with all federal, state, and local requirements. K, purchasing educational technology, including hardware, software, and connectivity for students who are served by the local educational agency that aids in regular and substantive educational interaction between students and their classroom instructors, including low-income students and children with disabilities, which may include assistive technology or adaptive equipment. L, providing mental health services and supports, including through the implementation of evidence-based full-service community schools. M, planning and implementing activities related to summer learning and supplemental after-school programs, including providing classroom instruction or online learning during the summer months, and addressing the needs of low-income students, children with disabilities, English learners, migrant students, students experiencing homelessness, and children in foster care. N, addressing learning loss among students, including low-income students, children with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, students experiencing homelessness, and children and youth in foster care of the local educational agency, including by 1, administering and using high-quality assessments that are valid and reliable to accurately assess students' academic progress and assist educators in meeting students' academic needs, including through differentiating instruction. 2, implementing evidence-based activities to meet the comprehensive needs of students. 3, providing information and assistance to parents and families on how they can effectively support students, including in a distance learning environment. And 4, tracking student attendance and improving student engagement in distance education. O, school facility repairs and improvements to enable operation of schools to reduce risk of virus transmission and exposure to environmental health hazards and to support student health needs. P, instruction, testing, maintenance, repair, replacement, and upgrade projects to improve the indoor air quality in school facilities, including mechanical and non-mechanical heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, filtering, purification, and other air cleaning, fans, control systems, and window and door repair and replacement. Q, developing strategies and implementing public health protocols, including to the greatest extent practicable policies in line with guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for the reopening and operation of school facilities to effectively maintain the health and safety of students, educators, and other staff are other activities that are necessary to maintain the operation of and continuity of services in local educational agencies and continuing to employ existing staff of the local educational agency. F, state funding. With funds not otherwise allocated under subsection D, a state, one, shall reserve not less than 5% of the total amount of grant funds awarded to the state under this section to carry out, directly or through grants or contracts, activities to address learning loss by supporting the implementation of evidence-based interventions such as summer learning or summer enrichment, extended day, comprehensive after-school programs, or extended school year programs, and ensure that such interventions respond to students' academic, social, and emotional needs and address the disproportionate impact of the coronavirus on the student subgroups described in section 1111B2B11 of the Elementary and Secondary School Act of 1965, 20 U.S.C. 6311B2B11, students experiencing homelessness, and children and youth in foster care, including by providing additional support to local educational agencies to fully address such impacts. 2, shall reserve not less than 1% of the total amount of grant funds awarded to the state under this section to carry out directly or through grants or contracts the implementation of evidence-based summer enrichment programs and ensure such programs respond to students' academic, social, and emotional needs and address the disproportionate impact of the coronavirus on the student populations described in section 1111B 2B11 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, 20 U.S.C. 6311B2B11, students experiencing homelessness, and children and youth in foster care. 3, shall reserve not less than 1% of the total amount of grant funds awarded to the state under this section to carry out directly or through grants or contracts the implementation of evidence-based comprehensive after-school programs and ensure such programs respond to students' academic, social, and emotional needs and address the disproportionate impact of the coronavirus on the student populations described in section 1111B2B11 of the Elementary and Secondary Act of 1965, 20 U.S.C. 6311B2B11, students experiencing homelessness, and children and youth in foster care. 4, shall reserve 2.5% of the total amount of grant funds awarded to the state under this section to carry out directly or through grants or contracts the purchase of educational technology, including hardware, software, and connectivity for students who are served by the local educational agencies in that state that aids in regular and substantive educational interaction between students and their classroom instructors, including low-income students and children with disabilities, which may include assistive technology or adaptive equipment. And 5, may reserve not more than 0.5% of the total amount of grant funds awarded to the state under this section for administrative costs and the remainder for emergency needs as determined by the state educational agency to address issues responding to coronavirus, which may be addressed through the use of grants or contracts. G, reallocation. The state shall return to the secretary any funds received under this section that the state does not award within 1 year of receiving such funds, and the secretary shall reallocate such funds to the remaining states in accordance with subsection C. H, definitions. In this section 1, the terms child, children with disabilities, distance education, elementary school, English learner, evidence-based, secondary school, local educational agency, parent, secretary, state educational agency, and technology have the meanings given those terms in section 8101 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, 20 U.S.C. 7801. 2, the term full-service community school has the meaning given that term in section 4622 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, 20 U.S.C. 72722. And 3, the term state means each of the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Section 2002, emergency assistance to non-public schools. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available through the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools program, there is appropriated to the Department of Education for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $2,750,000,000 to remain available through September 30, 2023, to make allocations to governors under the Emergency Assistance to Non-Public Schools program to provide services or assistance to non-public schools that enroll a significant percentage of low-income students that are most impacted by the qualifying emergency. B, limitations. Funds provided under subsection A shall not be used to provide reimbursements to any non-public school. Section 2003, Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there was appropriated to the Department of Education for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $39,584,570,000 to remain available through September 30, 2023, to make allocations to institutions of higher education in accordance with the same terms and conditions of Section 314 of the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act 2021, Division M of Public Law 116-260, except that 1, subsection A1 of such Section 314 shall be applied by submitting 91% for 89%. 2, subsection A2 of such Section 314 shall be applied A in the matter preceding subparagraph A by substituting under the heading Higher Education in the Department of Education Appropriations Act 2020 for in the further Consolidated Appropriations Act 2020 Public Law 116-94, and B in some paragraph B by substituting under the heading Higher Education in the Department of Education Appropriations Act 2020 for in the further Consolidated Appropriations Act 2020 Public Law 116-94. 3, an institution that receives an allocation apportioned in accordance with Clause 3 of subsection A2A of such Section 314 that has a total endowment size of less than $1 million, including an institution that does not have an endowment, shall be treated by the Secretary as having a total endowment size of $1 million for the purposes of such Clause 3. 4, subsection A4 of such Section 314 shall be applied by substituting 1% for 3%. 5, except as provided in paragraphs 7 and 9 of subsection D of such Section 314, an institution shall use a portion of funds received under the section to A, implement evidence-based practices to monitor and suppress coronavirus in accordance with public health guidelines, and B, conduct direct outreach to financial aid applicants about the opportunity to receive a financial aid adjustment due to the recent unemployment of a family member or independent student or other circumstances described in Section 479A of the Higher Education Act of 1965, 20 U.S.C. 1087 TT. 6, the following shall not apply to funds provided or received in accordance with this section A, subsection B of such Section 314, B, paragraph 2 of subsection C of such Section 314, C, paragraphs 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 8 of subsection D of such Section 314, D, subsections E and F of such Section 314, and E, Section 316 of the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act 2021, Division M of Public Law 116-260, and 7, an institution that receives an allocation under this section apportioned in accordance with subparagraphs A through D of subsection A1 of such Section 314 shall not use less than 50% of such allocation to provide emergency financial aid grants to students in accordance with subsection C3 of such Section 314. Section 2004, maintenance of effort and maintenance of equity. A, state maintenance of effort. 1, in general, as a condition of receiving funds under Section 2001, a state shall maintain support for elementary and secondary education and for higher education, which shall include state funding to institutions of higher education and state need-based financial aid, and shall not include support for capital projects or for research and development or tuition and fees paid by students in each of fiscal years 2022 and 2022, at least at the proportional levels of such states' support for elementary and secondary education and for higher education relative to such states' overall spending, averaged over fiscal years 2017, 2018, and 2019. 2, waiver. For the purpose of relieving fiscal burdens incurred by states in preventing, preparing for, and responding to the coronavirus, the Secretary of Education may waive any maintenance of effort requirements associated with the Education Stabilization Fund. B, state maintenance of equity. 1, high-need local educational agencies. As a condition of receiving funds under Section 2001, a state educational agency shall not, in fiscal years 2022 or 2023, reduce state funding as calculated on a per-pupil basis for any high-need local educational agency in the state by an amount that exceeds the overall per-pupil reduction in state funds, if any, across all local educational agencies in such state and such fiscal year. 2, highest poverty local educational agencies, notwithstanding paragraph 1, as a condition of receiving funds under Section 2001, a state educational agency shall not, in fiscal year 2022 or 2023, reduce state funding as calculated on a per-pupil basis for any highest poverty local educational agency below the level of funding as calculated on a per-pupil basis provided to each such local educational agency in fiscal year 2019. C, local educational agency maintenance of equity for high poverty schools. 1, in general, As a condition of receiving funds under Section 2001, a local educational agency shall not, in fiscal year 2022 or 2023, A, reduce per pupil funding from combined state and local funding for any high poverty school served by such local educational agency by an amount that exceeds, 1, the total reduction in local educational agency funding from combined state and local funding for all schools served by the local educational agency in such fiscal year, if any, divided by 2, the number of children enrolled in all schools served by the local educational agency in such fiscal year, or B, reduce per pupil full-time equivalent staff in any high poverty school by an amount that exceeds, 1, the total reduction in full-time equivalent staff in all schools served by such local educational agency in such fiscal year, if any, divided by 2, the number of children enrolled in all schools served by the local educational agency in such fiscal year. 2, exception. Paragraph 1 shall not apply to a local educational agency in fiscal year 2022 or 2023 that meets at least one of the following criteria in such fiscal year. A, such local educational agency has a total enrollment of less than 1,000 students. B, such local educational agency operates a single school. C, such local educational agency serves all students within each grade span with a single school. D, such local educational agency demonstrates an exceptional or uncontrollable circumstance such as unpredictable changes in student enrollment or precipitous decline in the financial resources of such agency as determined by the Secretary of Education. D, definitions. In this section 1, elementary education, secondary education, the terms elementary education and secondary education have the meaning given such terms under state law. 2, highest poverty local educational agency. The term highest poverty local educational agency means a local educational agency that is among the group of local educational agencies in that state that A, in rank order, had the highest percentages of economically disadvantaged students in the state on the basis of the most recent satisfactory data available from the Department of Commerce, or for local educational agencies for which no such data are available, such other data as the Secretary of Education determines are satisfactory, and B, collectively serve not less than 20% of the state's total enrollment of students served by all local educational agencies in the state. 3, high-need local educational agencies. The term high-need local educational agency means a local educational agency that is among the group of local educational agencies in the state that A, in rank order, have the highest percentage of economically disadvantaged students in the state on the basis of the most recent satisfactory data available from the Department of Commerce, or for local educational agencies for which no such data are available, such other data as the Secretary of Education determines are satisfactory, and B, collectively serve not less than 50% of the state's total enrollment of students served by all local educational agencies in the state. 4, high poverty school. A, in general, the term high poverty school means with respect to a school served by a local educational agency, a school that is in the highest quartile of schools served by such local educational agency based on the percentage of economically disadvantaged students served as determined by the state in accordance with subparagraph B. B, determination. In making the determination of subparagraph A, a state shall select a measure of poverty established for the purposes of this paragraph by the Secretary of Education and apply such measure consistently to all schools in the state. 5, overall per pupil reduction in state funds. The term overall per pupil reduction in state funds means with respect to a fiscal year A, the amount of any reduction in the total amount of state funds provided to all local educational agencies in the state in such fiscal year compared to the total amount of such funds provided to all local educational agencies in the state in the previous fiscal year, divided by B, the aggregate number of children enrolled in all schools served by all local educational agencies in the state for the fiscal year for which the determination is being made. 6, state. The term state means each of the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. Section 2005, outlying areas. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there was appropriated by the Department of Education for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $850 million to remain available through September 30, 2023 for the Secretary of Education to allocate awards to the outlying areas on the basis of their respective needs as determined by the Secretary to be allocated not more than 30 calendar days after the date of enactment of this act. Section 2006, Gallaudet University. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Department of Education for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $19,250,000 to remain available through September 30, 2023 for the Kindle Demonstration Elementary School, the Model Secondary School for the Deaf, and the Gallaudet University to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus, including to defray expenses associated with coronavirus, including lost revenue, reimbursement for expenses already incurred, technology costs associated with the transition to distance education, faculty and staff trainings, and payroll, and to provide financial aid grants to students which may be used for any component of the student's cost of education. Section 2007, Student Administration. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Department of Education for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $91,130,000 to remain available through September 30, 2023 for student aid administration within the Department of Education to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus, including direct outreach to students and borrowers about financial aid, economic impact payments, means-tested benefits, unemployment assistance, and tax benefits for which the students and borrowers may be eligible. Section 2008, Howard University. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Department of Education for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $35 million to remain available through September 30, 2023 for Howard University to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus, including to defray expenses associated with coronavirus, including lost revenue, reimbursement for expenses already incurred, technology costs associated with the transition to a distance education, faculty and staff trainings, and payroll, and to provide financial aid grants to students which may be used for any component of the student's cost of attendance. Section 2009, National Technical Institute for the Deaf. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Department of Education for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $19,250,000 to remain available through September 30, 2023 for the National Technical Institute for the Deaf to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus, including to defray expenses associated with coronavirus, including lost revenue, reimbursement for expenses already incurred, technology costs associated with the transition to distance education, faculty and staff training, and payroll, and to provide financial aid grants to students which may be used for any component of the student's cost of attendance. Section 2010, Institute for Educational Sciences. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Department of Education for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $100 million to remain available through September 30, 2023 for the Institute of Education Sciences to carry out research related to addressing learning loss caused by the coronavirus among the student subgroups described in Section 1111B2B11 of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, 20 U.S.C. 6311B2B11, and the students experiencing homelessness in children and youth in foster care, and to disseminate such findings to state educational agencies and local educational agencies and other appropriate entities.
Section 2011, Program Administration. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Department of Education for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriate, $15 million to remain available through September 30th, 2024 for program administration within the Department of Education to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus, and for salaries and expenses necessary to implement this part. Section 2012, Office of Inspector General. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Department of Education for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriate, $5 million to remain available until expended for the Office of Inspector General of the Department of Education for salaries and expenses necessary for oversight, investigations and audits of programs, grants, and projects funded under this part carried out by the Office of Inspector General. Section 2013, Modification of Revenue Requirements for Proprietary Institutions of Higher Education. A, in general, Section 487A24 of the Higher Education Act of 1965, 20 U.S.C. 1094A24 is amended by striking funds provided under this title and inserting federal funds that are dispersed or delivered to or on behalf of a student to be used to attend such institution, referred to in this paragraph in subsection D as federal education assistance funds. B, implementation of non-federal revenue requirements, section 487D of the Higher Education Act of 1965, 20 U.S.C. 1094D is amended. 1, in the subsection heading by striking non-Title IV and inserting non-federal, and 2, in paragraph 1C by striking funds for a program under this title and inserting federal education assistance funds. Part 2, Miscellaneous, Section 2021, National Endowment for the Arts. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $135 million to remain available until expended under the National Foundation on the Arts and the Humanities of 1965 as follows. 1, 40% shall be for grants and relevant administrative expenses to state art agencies and regional arts organizations that support organizations' programming and general operating expenses to cover up to 100% of the cost of the program which the grants support to prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from the coronavirus. 2, 60% shall be for direct grants and relevant administrative expenses that support organizations' programming and general operation expenses to cover up to 100% of the cost of the programs which the grants support to prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from the coronavirus. Section 2022, National Endowment for the Humanities. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $135 million to remain available until expended under the National Foundation on the Arts and the Humanities Act of 1965 as follows. 1, 40% shall be for grants and relevant administrative expenses to state humanities councils that support humanities organizations' programming and general operating expenses to cover up to 100% of the cost of the programs which the grants support to prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from the coronavirus. 2, 60% shall be for direct grants and relevant administrative expenses that support humanities organizations' programming and general operating expenses to cover up to 100% of the cost of the programs which the grants support to prevent, prepare for, respond to, and recover from the coronavirus. Section 2023, Institute of Museum and Library Services. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Institute of Museum and Library Services for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $200 million to remain available until expended for necessary expenses to carry out museum and library services. The Director of the Institute of Museum and Library Services shall award not less than 89% of such funds to state library administrative agencies by applying the formula in Section 221B of the Museum and Library Services Act, except that 1, Section 221B3A of such act shall be applied by substituting $2 million for $680,000 and by substituting $200,000 for $60,000, and 2, Section 221B3C and subsections B and C of Section 223 of such act shall not apply to funds provided under this section. Subtitle B, Labor Matters, Section 2101, Funding for Department of Labor Worker Protection Activities. A, appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise made available out of any funds in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, there are appropriated to the Secretary of Labor for fiscal year 2021, $200 million to remain available until September 30th, 2023 for the Wage and Hour Division and Office of Workers' Compensation Programs, the Office of Solicitor, the Mine Safety and Health Administration, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration to carry out COVID-19 related worker protection activities, and for the Office of Inspector General for oversight of the Secretary's activities to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19. B, allocation of amounts. Amounts appropriated under subsection A shall be allocated as follows. 1, not less than $100 million shall be for the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, of which $10 million shall be for the Susan Harwood training grants, and not less than $5 million shall be for enforcement activities related to COVID-19 at high-risk workplaces, including healthcare, meat and poultry processing facilities, agricultural workplaces, and correctional facilities. 2, $12,500,000 shall be for the Office of the Inspector General. Subtitle C, Human Services and Community Supports, Section 2201, Child Care and Development Block Grant Program. A, Child Care and Development Block Grant funding, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any amounts in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $14,990,000,000 to remain available through September 30th, 2021 to carry out the program authorized under Section 658C of the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act of 1990, 42 U.S.C. 9858A, without regard to requirements in Sections 658E, C, 3E, or 658G of such acts, 42 U.S.C. 9858C, C, 3E, 9858E, payments made to states, territories, Indian tribes, and tribal organizations from funds made available under this subsection shall be obligated to fiscal year 2021 or the succeeding 2 fiscal years. States, territories, Indian tribes, and tribal organizations are authorized to use such funds to provide childcare assistance to healthcare sector employees, emergency responders, sanitation workers, and other workers deemed essential during the response to coronavirus by public officials without regard to the income eligibility requirements of Section 658P4 of the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act, 42 U.S.C. 9858N4. B, administrative cost. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any amounts in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $35 million to remain available through September 30th, 2025 for the cost of providing technical assistance and conducting research, and for the administrative cost to carry out the section 2202 of the subtitle. Section 2202, Child Care Stabilization. A, definitions. In this section, 1, COVID-19 public health emergency. The term COVID-19 public health emergency means the public health emergency declared by the Secretary of Health and Human Services under Section 319 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 4247D, on January 31st, 2020, with respect to COVID-19, including any renewal of this declaration. 2, eligible child care provider. The term eligible child care provider means A, an eligible child care provider as defined in Section 658P of the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act of 1990, 42 U.S.C. 9858N, or B, a child care provider that is licensed, regulated, or registered in the state, territory, or Indian tribe on the date of enactment of this act and meets applicable state and local health and safety requirements. B, child care stabilization funding. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any amounts in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $23,975,000,000 to remain available through September 30th, 2021 for grants under the section in accordance with the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act of 1990. C, grants. From the amounts appropriated to carry out this section under the authority of the Section 6580 of the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act of 1990, 42 U.S.C. 9858M. In this section, the Secretary shall award to such lead agency a child care stabilization grant without regard to the requirements in subparagraphs C and E of Section 658E(C)(3) and in Section 658G of the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act of 1990, 42 U.S.C. 9858 C(3) 9858E. Such grant shall be allotted in accordance with Section 6580 of the Child Care and Development Block Grant Act of 1990, 42 U.S.C. 9858M. D, state reservations and subgrants. 1, reservation. A lead agency for a state that receives a child care stabilization grant pursuant to subsection C shall reserve not more than 10% of such grant funds to administer subgrants, provide technical assistance and support for applying for and accessing the subgrant opportunity, publicize the availability of the subgrants, carry out activities to increase the supply of childcare, and provide technical assistance to help childcare providers implement policies as described in paragraph 2D1. 2 subgrants to qualified childcare providers. A, in general, the lead agency shall use the remainder of the grant funds awarded pursuant to subsection C to make subgrants to qualified childcare providers described in subparagraph B, regardless of such a provider's previous receipt of other federal assistance to support the stability of the childcare sector during and after the COVID-19 public health emergency. B, qualified childcare provider. To be qualified to receive a subgrant under this paragraph, a provider shall be an eligible child care provider that on the date of the submission of an application for the subgrant was either 1, open and available to provide child care services, or 2, closed due to public health, financial hardships, or other reasons relating to the COVID-19 public health emergency. C, subgrant amount. The amount of such a subgrant to a qualified child care provider shall be based on the provider's stated current operating expenses, including costs associated with providing or preparing to provide child care services during the COVID-19 public health emergency, and to the extent practicable, cover sufficient operating expenses to ensure continuous operations for the intended period of the subgrant. D, application. The lead agency shall, 1, make available on the lead agency's website an application for qualified child care providers that includes certifications that for the duration of the subgrant, 1, the provider applying will when open and available to provide child care services, implement policies in line with the guidance from the corresponding state, tribal, and local authorities, and in accordance with state, tribal, and local orders, and to the greatest extent possible, implement policies in line with guidance from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. 2, for each employee, the provider will pay not less than the full compensation, including any benefits that was provided to the employee as the date of submission for the application for the subgrant referred to in the subclause as full compensation, and will not take any action that reduces the weekly amount of the employee's compensation below the weekly amount of full compensation, or that reduces the employee's rate of compensation below the rate of full compensation, including the involuntary furloughing of any employee on the date of submission of the application of the subgrant. And 3, the provider will provide relief from co-payments and tuition payments for the families enrolled in the provider's program to the extent possible, and prioritize each relief for families struggling to make either type of payment. And 2, accept and process applications submitted under this subparagraph on a rolling basis and provide subgrant funds in advance of provider expenditures except as provided in subsection E2. E, obligation. The lead agency shall notify the secretary if it is unable to obligate at least 50% of the funds received pursuant to subsection C that are available for subgrants described in this paragraph within 9 months of the date of enactment of this act. E, use of funds. 1, in general, a qualified child care provider that receives funds through such a subgrant shall use the funds for at least one of the following. A, personnel costs, including payroll and salaries or similar compensation for an employee, including any sole proprietor or independent contractor, employee benefit, premium pay, or cost for employee recruitment and retention. B, rent, including rent under a lease agreement or payment under any mortgage obligation, utilities, facility management, or improvements, or insurance. C, personal protective equipment, cleaning and sanitation supplies and services, or training and professional development related to health and safety practices. D, purchases of or updates to equipment and supplies to respond to the COVID-19 public health emergency. E, goods and services necessary to maintain or resume childcare services. F, mental health support for children and employees. 2, reimbursement. The qualified childcare provider may use the subgrant funds to reimburse the provider for sums obligated or expended before the date of enactment of this act for the cost of a good or service described in paragraph 1 to respond to the COVID-19 public health emergency. F, supplement, not supplant. Amounts made available to carry out this subsection shall be used to supplement and supplant other federal, state, and local public funds expended to provide child care services for eligible individuals. Section 2203, Head Start. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any amounts in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $1 billion to remain available through September 30th, 2022 to carry out the Head Start Act, including the federal administrative expenses. After reserving funds for federal administrative expenses, the Secretary shall allocate all remaining amounts to Head Start agencies for one-time grants and shall allocate to each Head Start agency an amount that bears the same ratio for the portion available for allocations as the number of enrolled children served by the Head Start agency bears to the number of enrolled children served by all Head Start agencies. Section 2204, Programs for Survivors. A, in general, Section 303 of the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, 42 USC 10403 is amended by adding to at the end of the following. D, additional funding. For the purposes of carrying out this title, in addition to amounts otherwise made available for such purposes, there are appropriated out of any amounts of the Treasury not otherwise appropriated for the fiscal year 2021 to remain available until expended, except as otherwise provided in this subsection, each of the following. $180 million to carry out the sections 301 through 312 to be allocated in the manner described in subsection A2, except that A, a reference in subsection A2 to an amount appropriate under subsection A1 shall be considered to be a reference to an amount appropriate under this paragraph. B, the matching requirement in section 306C4 and the condition in section 308D3 shall not apply. And C, each reference in section 305E to the end of the following fiscal year shall be considered to be a reference to the end of the fiscal year 2025. And D, funds made available to the state on grant under section 306A and obligated in a timely manner shall be available for expenditure by the state or recipient of funds for the grant through the end of fiscal year 2025. 2, $18 million to carry out section 309. 3, $2 million to carry out section 313, of which $1 million shall be allocated to support Indian communities. B, COVID-19 public health emergency defined. In this section, the term COVID-19 public health emergency means the public health emergency declared by the Secretary of Health and Human Services under section 319 of the Public Health Service Act 42 USC 247D on January 31st, 2020 with respect to COVID-19, including any renewal of the declaration. C, grants to support culturally specific populations. One, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise made available, there is appropriated out of any amounts in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated to the Secretary of Health and Human Services in this section referred to as the Secretary, $49,500,000 for fiscal year 2021 to be available until expended to carry out the subsection, excluding federal administrative costs for which funds are appropriated under subsection E. 2, use of funds. From amounts appropriated under paragraph 1, the Secretary acting through the Director of the Family Violence Prevention Services Program shall A, support culturally specific community-based organizations to provide culturally specific activities for survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence to address emergent needs resulting from the COVID-19 public health emergency and other public health concerns, and B, support culturally specific community-based organizations that provide culturally specific activities to promote strategic partnership development and collaboration in response to the impact of COVID-19 and other public health concerns on survivors of sexual assault and domestic abuse. D, grants to support survivors of sexual assault. 1, in general, in addition to the amounts otherwise made available, there is appropriated out of any amounts in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated to the Secretary, $198 million for fiscal year 2021 to be available until expended to carry out in the subsection, excluding federal administrative costs for which funds are appropriate under subsection E. 2, use of funds. From amounts appropriated under paragraph 1, the Secretary acting through the Director of the Family Violence Prevention and Services Program shall assist rape crisis centers in transitioning to virtual services and meeting the emergency needs of survivors. E, administrative costs. In addition to the amounts otherwise made available, there is an appropriated to the Secretary, out of any amounts in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $2,500,000 for the fiscal year 2021 to remain available until expended for the federal administrative costs of carrying out subsections C and D. Section 2205, Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Health and Human Services for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, the following amounts to remain available through September 30th, 2023. 1, $250 million for carrying out the program authorized under Section 201 of the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, 42 U.S.C. 5116, which shall be allocated without regard to Section 204(4) of such act, 42 U.S.C. 5116(d)(4), and shall be allotted to states in accordance with Section 203 of such act, 42 U.S.C. 5116(b), except that A, in subsection B, 1A of such section 203, 70% shall be deemed to be 100%, and B, subsections B, 1B, and C of such section 203 shall not apply, and 2, $100 million for carrying out the state grant program authorized under Section 106 of the Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, 42 U.S.C. 5106A, which shall be allocated without regard to Section 112A2 of such act, 42 U.S.C. 5106HA2. Section 2206, Corporation for National and Community Service and the National Service Trust. A, Corporation for National and Community Service. In addition to amounts otherwise made available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated to the Corporation for National and Community Services, $852 million to remain available through September 30th, 2024 to carry out subsection B, except that amounts to carry out subsection B7 shall remain available until September 30th, 2026. B, allocation of amounts. Amounts provided by subsection A shall be allocated as follows. 1, AmeriCorps State and National, $620 million shall be used, A, to increase the living allowances of participants in national service programs, and B, to make funding adjustments to existing as of the date of the enactment of this act, awards and award new and additional awards to entities to support programs described in paragraphs 1B, 2B, 3B, 4B, and 5B of subsection A, and subsection B2 of section 122 of the National Community Service Act of 1990, 42 U.S.C. 12572, whether or not the entities are already grant recipients under such provisions on the day of enactment of this act, and notwithstanding section 122A, 1B, 6 of the National Community Service Act of 1990, 42 U.S.C. 12572A, 1B, 6 by 1, prioritizing entities serving communities disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and utilizing culturally competent and multilingual strategies and provisions of services, and 2, taking into account the diversity of communities and participants served by such entities, including racial, ethnic, socioeconomic, linguistic, and geographic diversity. 2, state commissions, $20 million shall be used to make adjustments to existing as of the date of the enactment of this act, awards and new and additional awards, including awards to the State Commission on National Community Service under Section 126A of the National Community Service Act of 1990, 42 U.S.C. 12576A. 3, Volunteer Generation Fund, $20 million shall be used for expenses authorized under Section 501A4 F of the National and Community Service Act of 1990, 42 U.S.C. 12681A 4F, which notwithstanding Section 198P D1B of that Act, 42 U.S.C. 12665(3) PD1B shall be for grants awarded to the Corporation for National and Community Service on a competitive basis. For AmeriCorps Vista, $80 million shall be used for the purposes described in Section 101 of the Domestic Volunteer Service Act of 1973, 42 U.S.C. 4951, including to increase the living allowances of volunteers described in Section 105B of the Domestic Volunteer Service Act of 1973, 42 U.S.C. 4955B. 5, National Senior Service Corps, $30 million shall be used for the purposes described in Section 200 of the Domestic Violence Service Act of 1973, 42 U.S.C. 5000. 6, administrative costs. $73 million shall be used for the Corporation for National and Community Service for administrative expenses to carry out programs and activities funded by subsection A. 7, Office of Inspector General, $9 million shall be used for the Office of Inspector General for the Corporation for National and Community Services for salaries and expenses necessary for oversight and audit of programs and activities funded by subsection A. C, National Service Trust, in addition to amounts otherwise made available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $148 million to remain available until expended for administration of the National Service Trust and for payments of the trust for the provision of education awards pursuant to Section 145A 1A of the National and Community Service Act of 1990, 42 U.S.C. 12601A 1A.
Subtitle D, Public Health. Section 2301, Funding for COVID-19 Vaccine Activities at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. A, in general, in addition to the amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Health and Human Services in this subtitle referred to as the Secretary for fiscal year 2021, out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $7.5 billion to remain available until expended to carry out activities to plan, prepare for, promote, distribute, administer, and monitor and track COVID-19 vaccines. 79B, use of funds. The Secretary, acting through the Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and in consultation with other agencies as applicable, shall, in conducting activities referred to in subsection A, 1, conduct activities to enhance, expand, and improve nationwide COVID-19 vaccine distribution and administration, including activities related to the distribution of ancillary medical products and supplies related to vaccines, and 2, provide technical assistance, guidance, and support to, and award grants or cooperative agreements to state, local, tribal, and territorial public health departments for enhancement of COVID-19 vaccine distribution and administration capabilities, including A, the distribution and administration of vaccines licensed under Section 351 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 262, or authorized under Section 564 of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, 21 U.S.C. 360 BBB3, and ancillary medical products and supplies related to vaccines. B, the establishment and expansion, including staffing support of community vaccination centers, particularly in underserved areas. C, the deployment of mobile vaccination units, particularly in underserved areas. D, information technology standards-based data and reporting enhancements, including improvements necessary to support standards-based sharing of data related to vaccine distribution and vaccine systems that enhance vaccine safety, effectiveness, and uptake, particularly among underserved populations. E, facility enhancements. F, communication with the public regarding when, where, and how to receive COVID-19 vaccines. And G, transportation of individuals to facilitate vaccinations, including at community vaccination centers and mobile vaccination units, particularly for underserved populations. C, supplemental funding for state vaccination grants. 1, definitions in the subsection A, base formula. The term base formula means the allocation of formula that applied to the Public Health Emergency Preparedness Cooperative Agreement fiscal year 2020. B, alternative allocation. The term alternative allocation means an allocation to each state, territory, or locality, calculating use of the percentage derived from the allocation received by such state, territory, or locality of the aggregate amount of fiscal year 2020 Public Health Emergency Preparedness Cooperative Agreement awards under Section 319C1 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 247T3A, 2, supplemental funding, A, in general, not later than 21 days after the date of the enactment of this act. The Secretary shall use amounts described in subsection A to provide supplemental funding to any state, locality, or territory that receive less of the amounts that were appropriated under Title III of Division M of Public Law 116260 for vaccination grants to be issued by the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention than such state, locality, or territory would have received had such amounts been allocated using the alternative allocation. B, amount. The amount of supplemental funding provided under this subsection shall be equal to the amount between 1, the amount of state, locality, or territory received or would receive under the base formula, and 2, the amount of state, locality, or territory would receive under the alternative allocation. Section 2302, funding for vaccine confidence activities. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $1 billion to remain available until expended, and carry out activities acting through the Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. 1, to strengthen vaccine confidence in the United States, including its territories and possessions. 2, to provide further information and education with respect to vaccines licensed under Section 351 of Public Health Service Act 42 U.S.C. 262 or authorized under Section 564 of the Federal Drug and Cosmetic Act 21 U.S.C. 360 BBB 3 and 3 to improve rates of vaccination throughout the United States, including its territories and possessions, including through activities described in Section 313 of the Public Health Service Act, as amended by Section 311 of Division BB of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, Public Law 116-260. Section 2303, funding for supply chain for COVID-19 vaccines, therapeutics, and medical supplies. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $6.05 billion to remain available until expended for necessary expenses with respect to research, development, manufacturing, production, and purchases of vaccines, therapeutics, and ancillary medical products, supplies to prevent, prepare, and respond to SARS-CoV-2 or any viral variant mutating their form with the pandemic potential, and 2, COVID-19 or any disease with potential to create a pandemic. Section 2304, funding for COVID-19 vaccine, therapeutic, and device activities at the Food and Drug Administration. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $500 million to remain available until expended to be used for evaluation of the continued performance, safety, and effectiveness, including with respect to emerging COVID-19 variants of vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics approved, cleared, licensed, or authorized for use for treatment, prevention, or diagnosis of COVID-19. Facilitation of advanced continuous manufacturing activities related to the production of vaccine and related materials, facilitation and conduct of inspections related to the manufacturing of vaccines, therapeutics, and devices delayed or canceled for reasons related to COVID-19, review of devices authorized for use for the treatment, prevention, or diagnosis of COVID-19, and oversight of the supply chain and mitigation of shortages of vaccines, therapeutics, and devices approved, cleared, licensed, or authorized for use for the treatment, prevention, or diagnosis of COVID-19 by the Food and Drug Administration. Section 2305, reduced cost sharing, A, in general. Section 1402 of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act is amended by redesignating subsection F and subsection G, and by inserting after subsection E the following new subsection. F, special rule for individuals who receive unemployment compensation during 2021. For purposes of this section, in the case of an individual who has received or has been approved to receive unemployment compensation for any week beginning during 2021 for the plan year in which such week begins, 1, such individual shall be treated as meeting the requirements of subsection B, 2, and 2, for the purposes of subsection C and D, there shall not be taken into account any household income or individual in excess of 133% of the poverty line for a family of the size involved. B, effective date. The amendment made by this section shall apply to plan years beginning after December 31st, 2020. Subtitle E, testing. Section 2401, funding for COVID-19 testing, contact tracing, and mitigation activities. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Health and Human Services in the subtitle referred to as Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $47.8 billion to remain available until expended to carry out activities to detect, diagnose, trace, and monitor SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 infections and related to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. B, use of funds from amounts appropriate. The Secretary shall, 1, implement a national evidence-based strategy for testing, conduct tracing, surveillance, and mitigation with respect to SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, including through activities authorized under Section 319A of the Public Health Service Act. 2, provide technical assistance, guidance, and support, and award grants or cooperative agreements to state, local, and territorial public health departments for activities to detect, diagnose, trace, and monitor SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 infections and related strategies and activities to mitigate the spread of COVID-19. 3, support the development, manufacturing, procurement, distribution, and administration of tests to detect or diagnose SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, including through A, support for the development, manufacture, procurement, and distribution of supplies necessary for administering tests such as personal protective equipment, and B, support for the acquisition, construction, alteration, or renovation of non-federally owned facilities for the production of diagnostics and ancillary medical products and supplies where the Secretary determines that such an investment is necessary to ensure the production of sufficient amount of such supplies. 4, establish and expand federal, state, local, and territorial testing, contact tracing capabilities, including A, through investments in laboratory capacity, such as 1, academic and research laboratories or other laboratories that could be used for processing of COVID-19 testing. 2, community-based testing sites and community-based organizations, or 3, mobile health units, particularly in medically underserved areas, and B, with respect to quarantine and isolation of contacts. 5, enhanced information technology, data modernization and reporting, including improvements necessary to support sharing of data related to public health capabilities. 6, award grants to or enter in cooperative agreements or contracts with state, local, and territorial public health departments to establish, expand, and sustain a public health workforce. And 7, to cover administrative and program supports costs necessary to conduct activities related to subparagraph A. Section 2402, funding for SARS-CoV-2 genomic sequencing and surveillance. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $1,750,000,000 to remain available until expended to strengthen and expand activities, workforce-related, genomic sequencing and analytics and disease surveillance. B, use of funds from amounts appropriated by subsection A, the Secretary acting through the Director of the Centers for the Disease Control and Prevention shall 1, conduct, expand, and improve activities to sequencing genomes, identify mutations, and survey the circulation and transmission of viruses and other organisms, including strains of SARS-CoV-2. 2, award grants or cooperative agreements to state, local, tribal, or territorial public health departments or public health laboratories. A, to increase their capacity to sequence genomes of circulating strains of viruses and other organisms, including SARS-CoV-2. B, to identify mutations in viruses and other organisms, including SARS-CoV-2. C, to use genomic sequencing to identify outbreaks and clusters of disease and infections, including COVID-19. And D, to develop effective disease response strategies based on genomic sequencing and surveillance data. 3, enhance and expand the informatics capabilities of the public health workforce. And 4, award grants for the construction, alteration, or renovation of facilities to improve genomic sequencing and surveillance capabilities at the state and local levels. Section 2403, funding for global health. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021, out of any amounts in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $750 million to remain available until expended for activities to be conducted acting through the Director of Centers for Disease Control, Prevention of Combat of SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19, and other emerging infectious diseases threats globally, including efforts related to global health security, global disease detection and response, global health protection, global immunization, global coordination on public health. Section 2404, funding for data modernization and forecasting center. In addition to the amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021, out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $500 million to remain available until expended for activities to be conducted acting through the Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to support public health data surveillance and analytics, infrastructure modernization initiative, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and establish, expand, and maintain efforts to modernize the United States disease warning system to forecast and track hotspots for COVID-19, its variants, and emerging biological threats, including academic workforce support for analytics and informatics infrastructure and data collection systems. Subtitle F, Public Health Workforce. Section 2501, funding for public health workforce. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Health and Human Services in the subtitle referred to as the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $7,660,000,000 to remain available until expended to carry out activities relating to establishing, expanding, and sustaining a public health workforce, including by making awards to state, local, and territorial public health departments. B, use of funds for public health determinants. Amounts made available to an awardee pursuant to subsection A shall be used for the following. 1, costs including wages and benefits related to the recruiting, hiring, and training of individuals. A, to serve as case investigators, contact tracers, social support specialists, community health workers, public health nurses, disease intervention specialists, epidemiologists, program managers, laboratory personnel, informaticians, communications and policy experts, and any other position as may be required to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19, and B, who are employed by 1, the state, territorial, or local public health department involved, or 2, a nonprofit, private, or public organization with demonstrated expertise in implementing public health programs and established relationships with such state, territorial, or local public health departments, particularly in medically underserved areas. 2, personal protective equipment, data management, and other technology or other necessary supplies. 3, administrative costs and activities necessary for awardees to implement activities funded under this section. 4, subawards from recipients of awards under subsection A to local health departments for the purpose of activities funded under this section. Section 2502, funding for medical reserve corps. In addition to the amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $100 million to remain available until expended for carrying out Section 2813 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 300HH-15, Subtitle G, Public Health Investments. Section 2601, funding for community health centers and community care. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, in this subtitle referred to as the Secretary, for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $7.6 billion to remain available until expended for necessary expenses, for awarding grants and cooperative agreements under Section 330 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 254B, to be awarded with regard to time limitation subsection E3, and subsections E6A3, E6B3, and R2B of subsection 30, and for necessary expenses for awarding grants to federally qualified health centers as described in sections 1861 AA 4B of the Social Security Act, 42 U.S.C. 1395 XAA 4B, and for awarding grants or contracts to Papaola Lakani and to qualified entities under Section 4 and 6 of the Native Hawaiian Health Care Improvement Act, 42 U.S.C. 11703, 11705, of the total amount appropriated by the preceding sentence, not less than $20 million shall be grants or contracts to Papaola Lakahi and to qualified entities under Section 4 and 6 of the Native Hawaiian Health Improvement Act, 42 U.S.C. 11703, 11705, B, use of funds. Amounts made available to an awardee pursuant to subsection A shall be used, 1, to plan, prepare for, promote, distribute, administer, and track COVID-19 vaccines, and to carry out other vaccine-related activities. 2, to detect, diagnose, trace, and monitor COVID-19 infections and related activities necessary to mitigate the spread of COVID-19, including activities related to and equipment or supplies purchased for testing, contact tracing, surveillance, mitigation, and treatment of COVID-19. 3, to purchase equipment and supplies to conduct mobile testing or vaccinations for COVID-19, to purchase and maintain mobile vehicles, equipment to conduct such testing or vaccinations, and to hire and train laboratory personnel and other staff to conduct such mobile testing or vaccinations, particularly in medically underserved areas. 4, to establish, expand, and sustain the healthcare workforce to prevent, prepare for, and respond to COVID-19, and to carry out other health workforce-related activities. 5, to modify, enhance, and expand healthcare services and infrastructure. And 6, to conduct community outreach and education activities related to COVID-19. C, past expenditures. An awardee may use amounts awarded pursuant to subsection A to cover the costs of the awardee carrying out any activities described in subsection B during the period beginning on the date of the declaration of the public health emergency by the Secretary under Section 319 of Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 247D on January 31st, 2020, with respect to COVID-19 and ending on the date of such award. Section 2602, funding for National Health Service Corps. A, in general, in addition to the amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $800 million to remain available until expended for carrying out sections 338A, 338B, 338I of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 254L, 254L, 1, 25Q1 with respect to the health workforce. B, state loan repayment programs. 1, in general, of the amount made available pursuant to Section A, $100 million shall be made available for providing primary health services through the grants to states under Section 338IA of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 254Q1A. 2, conditions with respect to grants described in paragraph 1 using funds made available under such paragraph. A, Section 338IB of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 254Q1B shall not apply. B, notwithstanding Section 338ID2 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 254Q1D2, not more than 10% in an award to a state from such amounts may be used by the state for costs of administering the state loan repayment program. Section 2603, funding for Nurse Corps. In addition to the amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $200 million to remain available until expended for carrying out Section 846 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 297N. Section 2604, funding for the teaching health centers that operate graduate medical education. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available and notwithstanding the capped amount referenced in subsections 340HB2 and 340HD2 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 256HB2 and D2, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $330 million to remain available until September 30th, 2023 for the program of payments to teaching health centers that operate graduate medical education under subsection 340H of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 256H, and for teaching health center development grants authorized under Section 749A of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 291. B, use of funds. Amounts available pursuant to subsection A shall be used for the following activities. 1, for making payments to establish new approved graduate medical residency training programs pursuant to Section 340HA1C of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 256HA1C. 2, to provide an increase to the per resident amount described in Sections 340HA2 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 256HA2 of $10,000. 3, for making payments under Section 340HA1A of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 256HA1A, to qualified teaching health centers for maintenance of filled positions at existing approved graduate medical residency training programs. 4, for making payments under Section 340HA1B of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 256A1B for the expansion of approved graduate medical residency training programs. 5, for making awards under Section 749A of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 293L1, to teaching health centers for the purpose of establishing new accredited or expanded primary care residency programs. 6, to cover administrative costs and activities necessary for qualified teaching health centers receiving payments under Section 340H of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 256H to carry out activities under such section. Section 2605, funding for family planning. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $50 million to remain available until expended for necessary expenses for making grants and contracts under Section 1001 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 300. Subtitle H, Mental Health and Substance Use Disorder. Section 2701, funding for block grants for community mental health services. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Health and Human Services in the subtitle referred to as the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $1,500 million to remain available until expended for carrying out subpart 1 of Part B of Title 19 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 300X, subpart 3 of Part B of Title 19 of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 300X 51, and Section 505C of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 290AA-4C, with respect to mental health, notwithstanding Section 1952 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 300X 62, Any amount awarded to a state out of amounts appropriated by this section shall be expended by the state by September 30th, 2025. Section 2702, funding for block grants for prevention and treatment of substance abuse. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $1,500 million to remain available until expended for carrying out Subpart 2 of Part B of Title 19 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 300X21, Subpart 3 of Part B of Title 19 of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 300X51, Section 505D of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 290AA 41D with respect to substance abuse, and Section 515D of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 290BB-21D, notwithstanding Section 1952 of the Public Health Service Act, 42 U.S.C. 300X-62. Any amount awarded to a state out of amounts appropriated by this section shall be expended by the state by September 30th, 2025.
Section 2703, funding for mental health and substance use disorder training for healthcare professionals, paraprofessionals, and public safety officers. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $80 million to remain available until expended for the purpose described in subsection B. B, use of funding. The Secretary, acting through the Administrator of the Health Resources and Services Administration, shall, taking into consideration the needs of rural and medically underserved communities, use amounts appropriated by subsection A to award grants or contracts to health professions, schools, academic health centers, state or local governments, Indian tribes and tribal organizations, or other appropriate public or private nonprofit entities or consortia of entities, including entities promoting multidisciplinary approaches to plan, develop, operate, or participate in health professions and nursing training activities for healthcare students, residents, professionals, paraprofessionals, trainees, and public safety officers and employers of such individuals in evidence-informed strategies for reducing and addressing suicide, burnout, mental health conditions, and substance use disorders among healthcare professionals. Section 2704, funding for education and awareness campaign encouraging healthy work conditions and use of mental health and substance use disorder services by healthcare professionals. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $20 million to remain available until expended for the purpose described in subsection B. B, use of funds. The Secretary, acting through the Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and in consultation with the medical professional community, shall use amounts appropriated by subsection A to carry out a national evidence-based education and awareness campaign directed at healthcare professionals and first responders, such as emergency medical service providers and employers of such professionals and first responders. Such awareness campaign shall, 1, encourage primary prevention of mental health conditions and substance use disorders and secondary and tertiary prevention by encouraging healthcare professionals to seek support and treatment for their own mental health and substance use concerns, and 2, help such professionals to identify risk factors in themselves and others and respond to such risks. Section 2705, funding for grants for healthcare providers to promote mental health among their health professional workforce. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $40 million to remain available until expended for the purpose described in subsection B. B, use of funds. The Secretary, acting through the Administrator of the Health Resources and Services Administration, shall, taking into consideration the needs of rural and medically underserved communities, use amounts appropriated by subsection A to award grants or contracts to entities providing health care, including healthcare providers, associations, and federally qualified health centers, to establish, enhance, or expand evidence-informed programs or protocols to promote mental health among their providers, other personnel, and members. Section 2706, funding for community-based funding for local substance use disorder services. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $30 million to remain available until expended to carry out the purpose described in subsection B. B, use of funds. 1, in general, the Secretary acting through the Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Use and in consultation with the Director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention shall award grants to support states, local, tribal, and territorial governments, tribal organizations, nonprofit, community-based organizations, and primary and behavioral health organizations to support community-based overdose prevention programs, syringe services programs, and other harm reduction services. 2, use of grants. Grant funds awarded under this section to eligible entities shall be used for preventing and controlling the spread of infectious diseases and the consequences of such diseases for individuals with substance use disorder. Distributing opioid overdose reversal medication to individuals at risk of overdose, connecting individuals at risk for or with a substance use disorder to overdose education, counseling, and health education, and encouraging such individuals to take steps to reduce the negative personal and public health impacts of substance use or misuse. Section 2707, funding for community-based funding for local behavioral health needs. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $50 million to remain available until expended to carry out the purpose described in subsection B. B, use of funds. 1, in general, the Secretary acting through the Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Use shall award grants to state, local, tribal, and territorial governments, tribal organizations, nonprofit community-based entities, and primary care and behavioral health organizations to address increased community behavioral health needs worsened by the COVID-19 public health emergency. 2, use of grants. Grant funds awarded under this section to eligible entities shall be used for promoting care coordination among local entities, training the mental and behavioral health workforce, relevant stakeholders, and community members, expanding evidence-based integrated models of care, addressing surge capacity for mental and behavioral health needs, providing mental and behavioral health services to individuals with mental health needs, including co-occurring substance use disorders, as delivered by behavioral and mental health professionals, utilizing telehealth services, and supporting, enhancing, or expanding mental and behavioral health preventive and crisis intervention services. Section 2708, funding for the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $10 million to remain available until expended for carrying out Section 582 of the Public Health Service Act 42 USC 290HH1 with respect to addressing the problem of high-risk or medically underserved persons who experience violence-related stress. Section 2709, funding for Project Aware. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $30 million to remain available until expended for carrying out Section 520A of the Public Health Service Act 42 USC 290BB32 with respect to advancing wellness and resiliency in education. Section 2710, funding for youth suicide prevention. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $20 million to remain available until expended for carrying out Sections 520E and 520E2 of the Public Health Service Act 42 USC 290BB36, 290BB36B. Section 2711, funding for behavioral health workforce education and training. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $100 million to remain available until expended for carrying out Section 756 of the Public Health Service Act 42 USC 294E1. Section 2712, funding for pediatric mental health care access. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $80 million to remain available until expended for carrying out Section 330M of the Public Health Service Act 42 USC 254C19. Section 2713, funding for expansion grants for certified community behavioral health clinics. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary acting through the Assistant Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Use for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $420 million, to remain available until expended for grants to communities and community organizations that meet the criteria for certified community behavioral health clinics pursuant to Section 223A of the Protecting Access to Medicare Act of 2014, 42 U.S.C. 1396A note. Subtitle 1, Exchange Grant Program, Section 2801, establishing a grant program for exchange modernization. A, in general, out of funds appropriated under subsection B, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, in this subtitle referred to as the Secretary, shall award grants to each American Health Benefits Exchange established under Section 1311B of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, 42 U.S.C. 18031B, other than an exchange established by the Secretary under Section 1321C of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 18041C, that submits to the Secretary an application at such time and in such manner and containing such information as specified by the Secretary for purposes of enabling such exchange to modernize or update any system, program, or technology utilized by such exchange to ensure such exchange is compliant with all applicable requirements. B, funding. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $20 million to remain available until September 30, 2022 for carrying out this section. Subtitle J, Continued Assistance to Rail Workers. Section 2901, Additional Enhanced Benefits under the Railroad Unemployment Insurance Act. A, in general, Section 2A5A of the Railroad Unemployment Insurance Act, 45 U.S.C. 352A5A is amended 1 in the first sentence A by striking March 14, 2021 and inserting August 29, 2021. B, by striking or July 1, 2020 and inserting July 1, 2020 or July 1, 2021. And 2, by adding at the end the following: for registration periods beginning after March 14, 2021, but on or before August 29, 2021, the recovery benefit payable under this subparagraph shall be in the amount of $800. B, clarification on authority to use funds. Funds appropriated under subparagraph B of Section 2A5 of the Railroad Unemployment Insurance Act, 45 U.S.C. 352A5, shall be available to cover the cost of recovery benefits provided under such Section 2A5 by reason of the amendments made by subsection A, as well as to cover the cost of such benefits provided under Section 2A5 as in effect on the day before the date of this enactment of this Act. 2902, Extended Unemployment Benefits under the Railroad Unemployment Insurance Act. A, in general, Section 2C2D of the Railroad Unemployment Insurance Act, 45 U.S.C. 352C2D is amended 1 in Clause 1, A, and Subclause 1 by striking 185 days and inserting 305 days. B, in Subclause 2 by striking 19 consecutive 14-day periods and inserting 31 consecutive 14-day periods. And 2, by striking 6 consecutive 14-day periods and inserting 18 consecutive 14-day periods. 2, in Clause 2, A, by striking 120 days of unemployment and inserting 240 days of unemployment. B, by striking 12 consecutive 14-day periods and inserting 24 consecutive 14-day periods. And C, by striking 6 consecutive 14-day periods and inserting 18 consecutive 14-day periods. And 3, in Clause 3, A, by striking June 30, 2021 and inserting June 30, 2022. And B, by striking the provisions of Clauses 1 and 2 shall not apply to any employee whose extended benefit period under subparagraph B begins after March 14, 2021, and shall not apply to any employee with respect to any registration period beginning after April 5, 2021, and inserting the provisions of Clauses 1 and 2 shall not apply to any employee with respect to any registration period beginning after August 29, 2021. B, clarification on authority to use funds. Funds appropriated under either the first or second sentence of Clause 5 of Section 2C2D of the Railroad Unemployment Insurance Act shall be available to cover the cost of additional extended unemployment benefits provided under such Section 2C2D by reason of the amendments made by subsection A, as well as to cover the cost of such benefits provided under Section 2C 2D as an effect on the day before the date of enactment of this act. Section 2903, extension of waiver of the 7-day waiting period for benefits under the Railroad Unemployment Insurance Act. A, in general, Section 2112A of the CARES Act 15 U.S.C. 9030A is amended by striking March 14, 2021 and inserting August 29, 2021. B, clarification on authority to use funds. Funds appropriated under Section 2112C of the CARES Act 15 U.S.C. 9030C shall be available to cover the cost of additional benefits payable due to Section 2112A of such act by reason of the amendments made by subsection A, as well as to cover the cost of such benefits payable due to Section 2112A as in effect on the day before the date of enactment of this act. Section 2904, Railroad Retirement Board and Office of the Inspector General funding. In addition to amounts otherwise made available, there are appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $27,975,000 to remain available until expended for the Railroad Retirement Board to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus, of which A, $6,800,000 shall be available for additional hiring and overtime bonuses as needed to administer the Railroad Unemployment Insurance Act, and B, $21,175,000 shall be to supplement, not supplant, existing resources devoted to operations and improvements for the information technology investment initiatives of the Railroad Retirement Board, and two, $500,000 to remain available until expended for the Railroad Retirement Board Office of Inspector General for audit, investigatory, and review activities. Subtitle K, Ratepayer Protection. Section 2911, Funding for LIHEAP. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any amounts in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $4,500,000,000 to remain available through September 30, 2022 for additional funding to provide payments under Section 2602B of the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Act of 1981, 42 U.S.C. 8621B, except that $2,250,000,000 of such amounts shall be allocated as though the total appropriation for such payments for fiscal year 2021 was less than $1,975,000,000, and two, Section 2607B2B of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 8626B2B, shall not apply to funds appropriated under this section for fiscal year 2021. Section 2912, Funding for Water Assistance Program. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Health and Human Services, in this section referred to as the Secretary, for fiscal year 2021 out of any amounts in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $500 million to remain available until expended for grants to states and Indian tribes to assist low-income households, particularly those with lowest incomes that pay a high proportion of household income for drinking water and wastewater services by providing funds to owners or operators of public water systems or treatment works to reduce arrearages of and rates charged to such households for such services. B, allotment. The Secretary shall, 1, allot amounts appropriated in this section to a state or Indian tribe based on A, the percentage of households in the state or under the jurisdiction of the Indian tribe with income equal or less than 150% of the federal poverty line, and B, the percentage of households in the state or under the jurisdiction of the Indian tribe that spend more than 30% of monthly income on housing, and 2, reserve up to 3% of the amount appropriated in this section for Indian tribes and tribal organizations. Subtitle L, Assistance for Older Americans, Grant Families, and Kinship Families. Section 2921, Supporting Older Americans and Their Families. A, appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $1,434,000,000 to remain available until expended to carry out the Older Americans Act of 1965. B, allocation of amounts. Amounts made available by subsection A shall be available as follows. 1, $750 million shall be available to carry out Part C of Title III of such act. 2, $25 million shall be available to carry out Title VI of such act, including Part C of such title. 3, $460 million shall be available to carry out Part B of Title III of such act, including for A, supportive services of the types made available for fiscal year 2020. B, efforts related to COVID-19 vaccination outreach, including education, communication, transportation, and other activities to facilitate vaccination of older individuals. And C, prevention and mitigation activities related to COVID-19 focused on addressing extended social isolation among older individuals, including activities for investments in technological equipment and solutions or other strategies aimed at alleviating negative health effects of social isolation due to long-term stay-at-home recommendations for older individuals for the duration of the COVID-19 public health emergency. 4, $44 million shall be available to carry out Part D of Title III of such act. 5, $145 million shall be available to carry out Part E of Title III of such act. 6, $10 million shall be available to carry out the long-term care ombudsman program under Title VII of such act. Section 2922, National Technical Assistance Center on Grant Families and Kinship Families. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Health and Human Services for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $10 million to remain available through September 30th, 2025 for the Secretary acting through the Administrator of the Administration for Community Living to establish directly or through grants or contracts a National Technical Assistance Center on Grant Families and Kinship Families, in this section referred to as the Center, to provide training, technical assistance, and resources for government programs, nonprofit, and other community-based organizations in Indian tribes, tribal organizations, and urban Indian organizations that serve grant families and kinship families to support the health and well-being of members of grant families and kinship families, including caregivers, children, and their parents. The center shall focus primarily on serving grant families and kinship families in which the primary caregiver is an adult age 55 or older, or the child has one or more disabilities. B, activities of the center. The center shall, 1, engage experts to stimulate the development of new and identify existing evidence-based, evidence-informed, and exemplary practices or programs related to health promotion, including mental health and substance use disorder treatment, education, nutrition, housing, financial needs, legal issues, disability, self-determination, caregiver support, and other issues to help serve caregivers, children, and their parents in grant families and kinship families. 2, encourage and support the implementation of the evidence-based, evidence-informed, and exemplary practices or programs identified under paragraph 1 to support grant families and kinship families, and to promote coordination of services for grant families and kinship families across systems that support them. 3, facilitate learning across states, territories, Indian tribes, tribal organizations, and urban Indian organizations for providing technical assistance, resources, and training related to issues described in paragraph 1 to individuals and entities across systems that directly work with grant families and kinship families. 4, help government programs, nonprofit, and other community-based organizations in Indian tribes, tribal organizations, and urban Indian organizations serving grant families and kinship families to plan and coordinate responses to assist grant families and kinship families during national, state, tribal, territorial, and local emergencies and disasters. And 5, assist government programs and nonprofit and other community-based organizations in promoting equity and implementing culturally and linguistically appropriate approaches as the programs and organizations serve grant families and kinship families. Title III, Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, Subtitle A, Defense Production Act of 1950, Section 3101, COVID-19 Emergency Medical Supplies Enhancement. A, supporting enhanced use of the Defense Production Act of 1950. In addition to funds otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated.
Okay. $10 billion notwithstanding Section 304E of the Defense Production Act of 1950, 50 U.S.C. 4534E to remain available until September 30, 2025, to carry out Titles 1, 3, 7 in such act in accordance with subsection B. B, medical supplies and equipment. 1, testing, PPE, vaccines, and other materials except that as provided in paragraph 2, amounts appropriated in subsection A shall be used for the purchase, production, including the construction, repair, and retrofitting of government-owned or private facilities as necessary, or distribution of medical supplies and equipment, including durable medical equipment relating to combating the COVID-19 pandemic, including A, in vitro diagnostic products for the detection of SARS-CoV-2 or the diagnosis of the virus that causes COVID-19, and the reagents and other materials necessary for producing, conducting, and administering such products, and the machinery, equipment, laboratory capacity, or other technology necessary to produce such products. Face masks, B, face masks and personal protective equipment, including face shields, nitrile gloves, and 95 filtering face piece, respirators, and any other masks or equipment, including durable medical equipment needed to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the materials, machinery, additional manufacturing lines or facilities, or other technology necessary to produce such equipment. And C, drugs, devices, and biological products that are approved, cleared, licensed, or authorized for use in treating or preventing COVID-19 and symptoms related to COVID-19, and any materials, manufacturing, machinery, additional manufacturing or fill finish lines or facilities, technology or equipment necessary to produce or use such drugs, biological products, or devices, including syringes, vials, or other supplies or equipment related to delivery, distribution, or administration. 2, responding to public health emergencies after September 30, 2022, amounts appropriated in subsection A may be used for any activity authorized by paragraph 1 or any other activity necessary to meet critical public health needs of the United States with respect to any pathogen that the President has determined has the potential for creating a public health emergency. Subtitle B, Housing Provisions, Section 3201, Emergency Rental Assistance, A, Funding. 1, appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of the Treasury for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $21,550 million to remain available until September 30, 2027 for making of payments to eligible guarantees under this section. 2, reservation of funds. Of the amount appropriated under paragraph 1, the Secretary shall reserve A, $305 million for making payments under this section to the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the United States Virgin Islands, Guam, Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and America Samoa. B, $30 million for costs of the Secretary for the administration of emergency rental assistance programs and technical assistance to recipients of any grants made by the Secretary to provide financial and other assistance to renters. C, $3 million for administrative expenses of the Inspector General relating to oversight of funds provided in this section. And D, $2.5 billion for payments to high-need grantees as provided in this section. B, allocation of funds to eligible grantees. 1, allocation for states and units of local government. A, in general, the amount appropriated under paragraph 1 of subsection A that remains under the application of paragraph 2 of such subsection shall be allocated to eligible grantees described in subparagraphs A and B of subsection F1 in the same manner as the amount appropriated under section 501 of subtitle A of title 5 of division N of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, Public Law 116-260, is allocated to states and units of local government under subsection B1 of subsection, except that section 501B of such subtitle A shall be applied, 1, without regard to 1 of paragraph 1A, 2, by deeming the amount appropriated under paragraph 1 of subsection A of this act that remains after the application of paragraph 2 of such subsection to be the amount deemed to apply for purposes of applying clause 2 of section 501B1A of such subtitle A. 3, by substituting $152 million for $200 million each place such term appears. 4, in the subclause 1 of such subsection 501B1AV, by substituting under section 3201 of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 for under section 501 of the subtitle A of Title 5 of Division N of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, and 5, in subclause 2 of such section 501B1A5 by substituting local government elects to receive funds from the Secretary under section 3201 of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, and will use the funds in a manner consistent with such section for local government elects to receive funds from the Secretary under section 501 of subtitle A of Title 5 of Division N of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, and will use the funds in a manner consistent with such section. B, pro rata adjustment. The Secretary shall make pro rata adjustments in the amount of the allocations determined under subparagraph A of this paragraph for entities described in such subparagraph as necessary to ensure that the total amount of allocations made pursuant to such subparagraph does not exceed the remainder appropriated amount described in such subparagraph. 2, allocations for territories. The amount reserved for under subsection A2A shall be allocated to eligible grantees guaranteed in subsection F1C in the same manner as the amount appropriated under section 501A2A of subtitle A of Title V of Division N of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, Public Law 116-260, is allocated under section 501B3 of such subtitle A to eligible grantees described under subparagraph C of such section 501B3, except that section 501B3 of such subtitle A shall be applied A in paragraph A by inserting of section 3201 of the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021 after the amount reserved under subsection A2A and B in clause 1 of paragraph B by substituting the amount equal to 0.3% of the amount appropriated under subsection A1 with the amount equal to 0.3% of the amount appropriated under subsection A1 of section 3201 of American Rescue Plan of 2021. 3, high-need grantees. The Secretary shall allocate funds reserved under subsection A2B to eligible grantees with a high need for assistance under this section with the number of very low-income renter households paying more than 50% of income on rent or living in substandard or overcrowded conditions, rental market costs, and change in employment since February 2020, used as the factors for allocating funds. C, payment schedule. 1, in general. The Secretary shall pay eligible grantees not less than 40% of each such eligible grantee's total allocation provided under subsection B within 60 days of enactment of this act. 2, subsequent payments. The Secretary shall pay to eligible grantees additional amounts in tranches up to the full amount of each such eligible grantee's total allocation in accordance with the procedure established by the Secretary, provided that any such procedure established by the Secretary shall require that an eligible grantee must have obligated not less than 75% of the funds already dispersed by the Secretary pursuant to this section prior to disbursement of additional funds. D, use of funds. 1, in general, an eligible grantee shall only use the funds provided from payments made under this section as follows. A, financial assistance. 1, in general, subject to clause 2 of this subparagraph, funds received by an eligible grantee from payments made under this section shall be used to provide financial assistance to eligible households not to exceed 18 months, including the payment of 1, rent. 2, rental arrears. 3, utilities and home energy costs. 4, utilities and home energy cost arrears. And 5, other expenses related to housing as defined by the Secretary. 2, limitation, the aggregate amount of financial assistance an eligible household may receive under this section when combined with financial assistance provided under section 501 of subtitle A of Title V of Division N of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, Public Law 116-260, shall not exceed 18 months. B, housing stability services. Not more than 10% of funds received by an eligible grantee from payments under this section may be used to provide case management and other services intended to help keep households stably housed. C, administrative costs. Not more than 15% of the total amount paid to an eligible grantee under this section may be used for administrative costs attributable to providing financial assistance, housing stability services, and other affordable rental housing and eviction prevention activities, including for data collection and reporting requirements related to such funds. D, other affordable rental housing and eviction prevention activities. An eligible grantee may use any funds from payments under this section that are unobligated on October 1, 2022 for purposes in addition to those specified in this paragraph, provided that 1, such other purposes are affordable rental housing and eviction prevention purposes as defined by the Secretary serving very low income families as such term is defined in section 3B of the United States Housing Act of 1937, 42 U.S.C. 1437 AB, and 2, prior to obligating any funds for such purposes, the eligible grantee has obligated not less than 75% of the total funds allocated to such eligible grantee in accordance with this section. 2, distribution of assistance. Amounts appropriated under subsection A1 of this section shall be subject to the same terms and conditions that apply under paragraph 4 of section 501C of subtitle A of Title V of Division N of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, Public Law 116-260. 2, amounts appropriated under subsection A1 of such section 501. E, reallocation of funds. 1, in general, beginning March 31, 2022, the Secretary shall reallocate funds allocated to eligible grantees in accordance with subsection B, but not yet paid in accordance with subsection C2, according to a procedure established by the Secretary. 2, eligibility for reallocated funds. The Secretary shall require an eligible grantee to have obligated 50% of the total amount of funds allocated to such eligible grantee under subsection B to be eligible to receive funds reallocated under paragraph 1 of this subsection. 3, payment of reallocated funds by the Secretary. The Secretary shall pay to each eligible grantee eligible for a payment of reallocated funds described in paragraph 2 of this subsection the amount allocated to such eligible grantee in accordance with the procedure established by the Secretary in accordance with paragraph 1 of this subsection. 4, use of reallocated funds. Eligible grantees may use any funds received in accordance with this subsection only for purposes specified in paragraph 1 of subsection D. F, definitions. In this section, 1, eligible grantee. The term eligible grantee means any of the following. A, the 50 states of the United States and the District of Columbia. B, a unit of local government as defined in paragraph 5. C, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the United States Virgin Islands, Guam, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and America Samoa. 2, eligible household. The term eligible household means a total of one or more individuals who are obligated to pay rent on a residential dwelling and with respect to which the eligible grantee involved determines that A, one or more individuals within the household has 1, qualified for unemployment benefits, or 2, experienced a reduction in household income, incurred significant costs, or experienced other financial hardship during or due directly or indirectly to the coronavirus pandemic. B, one or more individuals within the household can demonstrate a risk of experiencing homelessness or housing instability, and C, the household is a low-income family. As such, term is defined in Section 3B of the United States Housing Act of 1937, 42 U.S.C. 1437A-B. 3, Inspector General. The term Inspector General means the Inspector General of the Department of the Treasury. 4, Secretary. The term Secretary means the Secretary of the Treasury. 5, Unit of Local Government. The term Unit of Local Government has the meaning given such term in Section 501 of Subtitle A of Title 5 of Division N of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, Public Law 116-260. G, availability. Funds provided to an eligible grantee under a payment made under this section shall remain available through September 30, 2025. H, extension of availability under program for existing funding. Paragraph 1 of Section 501E of Subtitle A of Title 5 of Division N of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, Public Law 116-260, is amended by striking December 31, 2021 and inserting September 30, 2022. Section 3202, emergency housing vouchers. A, appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there was an appropriated to the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in this section referred to as the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $5 billion to remain available until September 30, 2030 for 1, incremental emergency vouchers under subsection B, 2, renewals of the vouchers under subsection B, 3, fees for the cost of administrating vouchers under subsection B and other eligible expenses defined by notice to prevent, prepare, and respond to coronavirus, to facilitate the leasing of the emergency vouchers, such as security deposit assistance and other costs related to retention and support of participating owners. And 4, adjustments in the calendar year 2021, Section 8 renewal funding allocation, including mainstream vouchers for public housing agencies that experience a significant increase in voucher per unit cost due to extraordinary circumstances, or that, despite taking reasonable cost-saving measures, would otherwise be required to terminate rental assistance for families as a result of insufficient funding. B, emergency vouchers. 1, in general, the Secretary shall provide emergency rental assistance vouchers under subsection A, which shall be tenant-based rental assistance under Section 80 of the United States Housing Act of 1937, 42 U.S.C. 1437 FO. 2, qualifying individuals or families defined for the purposes of this section. Qualifying individuals or families are those who are A, homeless, as such term is defined in Section 103A of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act 42 U.S.C. 11302A. B, at risk of homelessness, as such term is defined in Section 4001 of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act 42 U.S.C. 113601. C, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking as defined by the Secretary. Or D, recently homeless as determined by the Secretary and for whom providing rental assistance will provide the family's homelessness or having high risk of housing instability. 3, allocation. The Secretary shall notify public housing agencies of the number of emergency vouchers provided under this section to be allocated to the agency not later than 60 days after the date of the enactment of this act, in accordance with the formula that includes public housing agency capacity, ensures geographic diversity, including with respect to rural areas among public housing agencies administering the Housing Choice Voucher Program. 4, terms and conditions. A, elections to administer. The Secretary shall establish a procedure for public housing agencies to accept or decline the emergency vouchers allocated to the agency in accordance with the formula under some paragraph. 3. B, failure to use according to the formula under paragraph 3. 5, waivers and alternative requirements. The Secretary may waive or specify alternative requirements for any provision of the United States Housing Act of 1937, 42 U.S.C. 1437, or regulation applicable to such statute other than requirements related to fair housing, non-discrimination, labor standards, and the environment upon a finding that the waiver or alternative requirement is necessary to expedite or facilitate the use of amounts made available in this section. Termination of such vouchers upon turnover. After September 30, 2023, a public housing agency may not reissue any vouchers made available under this section when assistance for the family assisted ends. C, technical assistance and other costs. The Secretary may use not more than $20 million of the amounts made available under this section for the cost to the Secretary of administering and overseeing the implementation of this section of the Housing Choice Voucher Program generally, including information technology, financial reporting, and other costs. Of the amounts set aside under this subsection, the Secretary may use not more than $10 million without competition to make new awards or increase prior awards to existing technical assistance providers to provide an immediate increase in capacity building and technical assistance to public housing agencies. D, implementation. The Secretary may implement the provisions of this section by notice. Section 3203, emergency assistance for rural housing. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Agriculture for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $100 million to remain available until September 30, 2022 to provide grants under Section 521A2 of the Housing Act of 1949 or agreements entered into in lieu of debt forgiveness or payments for eligible households as authorized by Section 502C5D of the Housing Act of 1949 for temporary adjustment of income losses for residents of housing financed or assisted under Section 514, 515, or 516 of the Housing Act of 1949 who have experienced income loss but are not currently receiving federal rental assistance. Section 3204, housing counseling. A, appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Neighborhood Reinvestment Corporation, in this section referred to as the corporation, for fiscal year 2021. Out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $100 million to remain available until September 30, 2025 for grants to housing counseling intermediaries approved by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, state housing finance agencies, and neighbor works organizations for providing housing counseling services as authorized under the Neighborhood Reinvestment Corporation Act, 42 U.S.C. 8101 through 8107, and consistent with the discretion set forth in Section 606A5 of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 8105A5, to design and administer grant programs of the grant funds made available under the subsection. Not less than 40% shall be provided to counseling organizations that, 1, target housing counseling services to minority and low-income populations facing housing instability, or 2, providing housing counseling services in neighborhoods having high concentrations of minority and low-income populations. B, limitation. An aggregate amount provided to neighbor works organizations under this section shall not exceed 15% of the total of grant funds made available by subsection A. C, administration and oversight. The corporation may retain a portion of the amounts provided under this section in a proportion consistent with its standard rate for program administration in order to cover its expenses related to program administration and oversight. D, housing counseling services defined. For the purposes of this section, the term housing counseling services means 1, housing counseling provided directly to households facing housing instability such as eviction, default, foreclosure, loss of income, or homelessness. 2, education, outreach, training, technology, upgrades, and other program-related support. And 3, operational oversight funding for grantees and subgrantees that receive funds under the section. Section 3205, homelessness assistance and supportive services program. A, appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, in this section referred to as the Secretary, for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $5 billion to remain available until September 30, 2025, except that amounts authorized under subsection D3 shall remain available until September 30, 2029 for assistance under Title II of the Cranston-Gonzalez National Affordable Housing Act, 42 U.S.C. 127 to 1 for the following activities to primarily benefit qualifying individuals or families. 1, tenant-based rental assistance. 2, the development and support of affordable housing pursuant to Section 212A of the Cranston-Gonzalez National Affordable Housing Act, 42 U.S.C. 12742A, the act herein. 3, supportive services to qualifying individuals or families not already receiving such supportive services, including A, activities listed in Section 401 29 of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, 42 U.S.C. 1136.029, B, housing counseling, and C, homeless prevention services for the acquisition and development of non-congregate shelter units, all or a portion of which may A, be converted to permanent affordable housing, B, be used as emergency shelter under subtitle B of Title IV of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, 42 U.S.C. 11371 through 11378, C, be converted to permanent housing under subtitle C of Title IV of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, 42 U.S.C. 11381 through 11389, or D, remain as a non-congregate shelter units. B, qualifying individuals or families defined for the purpose of this section. Qualifying individuals or families are those who are, 1, homeless as defined in Section 103A of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, 42 U.S.C. 11302A, 2, at risk of homelessness as defined in Section 4011 of the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, 42 U.S.C. 113601. 3, fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, or human trafficking as defined by the Secretary. 4, in other populations where providing supportive services or assistance under Section 212A of the Act, 42 U.S.C. 12742A, would prevent the family's homelessness or would serve those with the greatest risk of housing instability. Or 2, veterans and families that include a veteran family member that meet one of the preceding criteria. C, terms and conditions. 1, funding restrictions. The cost limits in Section 212E, 42 U.S.C. 12742E, the commitment requirements in Section 218G, 42 U.S.C. 12748G, the matching requirements in Section 220, 42 U.S.C. 12750, and the set aside for housing development developed, sponsored, or owned by community housing development organizations required in Section 231 of the Act, 42 U.S.C. 12771, shall not apply for amounts made available in this section. 2, administrative costs, notwithstanding Sections 212C and D1 of the Act, 42 U.S.C. 12742C and D1 of the funds made available in this section for carrying out activities authorized by this section, a grantee may use up to 15% of its allocation for administrative and planning costs. 3, operating expenses, notwithstanding Sections 212A and G of the Act, 42 U.S.C. 12742A and G, a grantee may use up to additional 5% of its allocation for the payment of operating expenses of community housing development organizations and nonprofit organizations carrying out activities authorized under this section, but only if A, such funds are used to develop the capacity of the community housing development organization or nonprofit organization in the jurisdiction or insular area to carry out activities authorized under this section, and B, the community housing development organization or nonprofit organization complies with the limitation on assistance in Section 234B of the Act, 42 U.S.C. 12774B. 4, contracting. A grantee, when contracting with service providers engaged directly in the provision of services under paragraph A3, shall, to the extent practicable, enter into contracts in amounts that cover the actual total program cost and administrative overhead to provide the services contracted. D, allocation. 1, formula assistance. Except as provided in paragraphs 2 and 3, the Secretary shall allocate amounts made available under this section pursuant to Section 217 of the Act, 42 U.S.C. 12747, to grantees that receive allocations pursuant to that same formula in fiscal year 2021, and shall make such allocations within 30 days of enactment of this Act. 2, technical assistance. Up to $25 million of the amounts made available under this section shall be used without competition to make new awards or increasing prior awards to existing technical assistance providers to provide an immediate increase in capacity building and technical assistance available to only any grantees implementing activities or projects consistent with this section. Other costs, up to $50 million of the amounts made available under this section shall be used for the administrative cost to oversee and administer implementation of this section of the home program generally, including information technology, financial reporting, and other costs. 4, waivers or alternative requirements. The Secretary may waive or specify alternative requirements for any provision of the Cranston-Gonzalez National Affordable Housing Act, 42 U.S.C. 1270, and Titles 1 and 4 of the McKinney-Vento Homelessness Act, 42 U.S.C. 1301, 1136. 11360, or regulation for the administration of the amounts made available under this section other than requirements related to fair housing, non-discrimination, labor standards, and the environment upon a finding that the waiver or alternative requirement is necessary to expedite or facilitate the use of amounts made available under this section. Section 3206, Homeowner Assistance Fund. A, appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of the Treasury for the Homeowner Assistance Fund established under subsection C for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated. $9,961,000,000 to remain available until September 30, 2025 for qualified expenses that meet the purposes specified under subsection C and expenses described in subsection D1. B, definitions in this section. 1, conforming loan limit. The term conforming loan limit means the applicable limitation governing the maximum original principal obligation of a mortgage secured by a single-family residence, a mortgage secured by a two-family residence, a mortgage secured by a three-family residence, or a mortgage secured by a four-family residence, as determined and adjusted annually under Section 302B2 of the Federal National Mortgage Association Charter Act, 12 U.S.C. 1717B2, and Section 305A2 of the Federal Home Loan Mortgage Corporation Act, 12 U.S.C. 1454A2. 2, dwelling. The term dwelling means any building structure or portion thereof which is occupied as or designed or intended for occupancy as a residence by one or more individuals. 3, eligible entity. The term eligible entity means A, estate, or B, any entity eligible for payment under subsection F. 4, mortgage. The term mortgage means any credit transaction A that is secured by a mortgage, deed of trust, or other consensual security interest on a principal residence of a borrower that is 1, a 1 to 4 unit dwelling, or 2, residential real property that includes a 1 to 4 unit dwelling, and B, the unpaid principal balance of which was at the time of origination not more than the conforming loan limit. 5, fund. The term fund means the homeowner assistance fund established under subsection C. 6, secretary. The term secretary means the Secretary of the Treasury. 7, state. The term state means any state of the United States, the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, the United States Virgin Islands, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. C, establishment of fund. 1, establishment, qualified expenses. There is established in the Department of the Treasury a homeowner assistance fund to mitigate financial hardships associated with the coronavirus pandemic by providing such funds as are appropriated by subsection A to eligible entities for the purpose of preventing homeowner mortgage delinquencies, defaults, foreclosures, loss of utilities or home energy services, and displacements of homeowners experiencing financial hardship after January 21, 2020 through qualified expenses related to mortgages and housing, which include A, mortgage payment assistance, B, financial assistance to allow a homeowner to reinstate a mortgage or to pay other housing-related costs related to a period of forbearance, delinquency, or default. C, principal reduction. D, facilitating interest rate reductions. E, payment assistance for 1, utilities, including electric, gas, home energy, and water. 2, internet service, including broadband internet access service, as defined in Section 81B of Title 47 Code of Federal Regulations or any successor regulation. 3, homeowners insurance, flood insurance, and mortgage insurance. And 4, homeowners association, condominium association fees or common charges. F, reimbursement of funds expended by a state, local government, or designated entity under subsection F during the period beginning on January 21, 2020 and ending on the date that the first funds are disbursed by the eligible entity under the homeowner assistance fund for the purpose of providing housing or utility payment assistance to homeowners or otherwise providing funds to prevent foreclosure or post-foreclosure eviction of a homeowner or prevent mortgage delinquency or loss of housing or utilities as a response to the coronavirus disease, COVID pandemic, and G, any other assistance or to promote housing stability for homeowners, including preventing mortgage delinquency, default, foreclosure, post-foreclosure eviction of a homeowner, or the loss of utility or home energy services as determined by the Secretary.
2, targeting. Not less than 60% of amounts made to each eligible entity allocated amounts under subsection D or F shall be used for qualified expenses that assist homeowners having incomes equal to or less than 100% of the area median income for their household size or equal to or less than 100% of the median income for the United States, as determined by the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, whichever is greater. The eligible entity shall prioritize remaining funds to socially disadvantaged individuals. D, allocation of funds. 1, administration. Of any amounts made available under the section, the Secretary shall reserve A, to the Department of the Treasury, an amount not to exceed $40 million to administer and oversee the fund and to provide technical assistance to eligible entities for the creation and implementation of state and tribal programs to administer assistance from the fund, and B, the Inspector General of the Department of the Treasury, an amount not to exceed $2.6 million for oversight of the program under the section. 2, for states, after the application of paragraphs 1, 4, and 5 of the subsection and subject to paragraph 3 of the subsection, the Secretary shall allocate the remaining funds available within the the Homeowners Assistance Fund to each state of the United States, the District of Columbia, and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico based on homeowner needs for such state relative to all states of the United States, the District of Columbia, and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico as the date of the enactment of this act, which is determined by reference to A, the average number of unemployed individuals measured over a period of time not fewer than 3 months and not more than 12 months, and B, the total number of mortgagors with one, mortgage payments that are more than 30 days past due, or 2, mortgages in foreclosure. 3, small state minimum. A, in general, each state of the United States, the District of Columbia, and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico shall receive no less than $50 million for the purposes established in C. B, pro rata adjustments. The Secretary shall adjust on a pro rata basis the amount of payments for each state of the United States, the District of Columbia, and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico determined under this subsection without regard to the subparagraph to the extent necessary to comply with the requirements of subparagraph A. 4, territory set aside. Notwithstanding any provision of the subsection of the amounts appropriate under subsection A, the Secretary shall reserve $30 million to be dispersed to Guam, American Samoa, the United States Virgin Islands, and the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands based on each territory's share of the combined total population of all such territories as determined by the Secretary. For the purposes of this paragraph, population shall be determined based on the most recent year for which data are available from the United States Census Bureau. 5, tribal set aside. The Secretary shall allocate funds to any eligible entity designated under subsection F pursuant to the requirements of that subsection. E, distribution of funds to states. 1, in general, the Secretary shall make payments beginning not later than 45 days after the enactment of this act from amounts allocated under subsection D to eligible entities that have notified the Secretary that they request to receive payments from the fund and that the eligible entity will use such payments in compliance with this section. 2, reallocation. If a state does not request allocated funds by the 45th day of the date of the enactment of this act, such state shall not be eligible for a payment from the Secretary pursuant to this section, and the Secretary shall, by the 180th day after the date of enactment of this act, reallocate any funds that were not requested by such state among the states that have requested funds by the 45th day after the date of the enactment of this act. For any such reallocation of funds, the Secretary shall adhere to the requirements of subsection D, except for paragraph 1, to the greatest extent possible, provided that the Secretary shall also take into consideration in determining such reallocation a state's remaining need and a state's record of using payments from the fund to serve homeowners at disproportionate rates of mortgage default, foreclosure, or displacement, including homeowners having incomes equal to or greater than 100% of the area median income for their household size, or 100% of the median income for the United States, as determined by the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, whichever is greater, and minority homeowners. F, tribal set aside. 1, set aside, notwithstanding any other provision of the section of the amounts appropriated under subsection A, the Secretary shall use 5% to make payments to entities that are eligible for payments under clauses 1 and 2 of section 501B2A of subtitle A of Title 5, of Division N of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, Public Law 116-260 for the purposes described in subsection C. 2, allocation and payment. The Secretary shall allocate the funds set aside under paragraph 1 using the allocation formulas described in clauses 1 and 2 of section 501B2A of subtitle A of Title 5 of Division N of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, Public Law 116-260, and shall make payments of such amounts beginning no later than 45 days after enactment of this act to entities eligible for payments under clauses 1 and 2 of section 501B2A of subtitle of Title 5 of Division N of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, Public Law 116-260, that notify the Secretary that they request to receive payments allocated from the fund by the Secretary for purposes described under subsection C and will not use such payments in compliance with this section. 3, adjustment. Allocations provided under this subsection may further adjusted as provided by section 501B2B of subtitle A of Title 5 of Division N of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021, Public Law 116-260. Section 3207, relief measures for section 502 and 504, direct loan borrowers. A, appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Agriculture in the section referred to as the Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriate, $39 million to remain available until September 30th, 2023 for direct loans made under section 501, 502 and 504, the Housing Act of 1949, 42 USC 1472, 1474. B, administrative expenses. The Secretary may not use more than 3% of the amounts appropriated under this section for administrative purposes. Section 3208, Fair Housing Activities. A, appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development in the section referred to as Secretary for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $20 million to remain available until September 30th, 2023 for the Fair Housing Initiatives Program under Section 561 of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1987, 42 U.S.C. 361(6)A, to ensure fair housing organizations have additional resources to address fair housing inquiries, complaints, investigations, education and outreach activities, and costs of delivering or adapting services during or relating to the coronavirus pandemic. B, administrative expenses. The Secretary may not use more than 3% of the amounts appropriated under this section for administrative purposes. Subtitle C, Small Business, SSBCI. Section 3301, State Small Business Credit Initiative. A, State Small Business Credit Initiative. 1. In general, the State Small Business Credit Initiative of 2010, 12 U.S.C. 57 at SAC is amended. A, in the section 3003, 1, in subsection B, 1, by amending paragraph 1 to read as follows. 1, in general, not later than 30 days after the date of enactment of subsection D, the Secretary shall allot federal funds to participating states so that each state is eligible to receive an amount equal to what the state would receive under the 2021 allocation, as determined under paragraph 2. 2, in paragraph 2, A, by striking 2009, each place such term appears inserting 2021. B, by striking 2008, each place such term appears and inserting 2020. C, in subparagraph A, by striking the Secretary and inserting with respect to states other than tribal governments, the Secretary. D, in subparagraph C1, by striking 2007 and inserting 2019. And E, by adding at the end of the following. C, separate allocation for tribal governments. 1, in general, with respect to states that are tribal governments, the Secretary shall determine the 2021 allocation by allocating $500 million among the tribal governments in the proportion the Secretary determines appropriate, including with consideration to available employment and economic data regarding such tribal government. 2, notice of intent, timing of allocation. With respect to allocations to states that are tribal governments, the Secretary may, 1, require tribal governments that individually or jointly wish to participate in the program to file a notice of intent with the Secretary not later than 30 days after the date of enactment of subsection D, and 2, notwithstanding paragraph 1, allocate federal funds to participating tribal governments not later than 60 days after the date of enactment of subsection D. D, employment data. If the Secretary determines that employment data with respect to a state is unavailable from the Bureau of Labor Statistics of the Department of Labor, the Secretary shall consider such other economic and employment data that is otherwise available for purposes of determining the employment data of such state. And 3, by striking paragraph 3 and 2 in subsection C, 1, in paragraph 1A3, by inserting before the period the following, that have delivered loans or investments to eligible businesses, and 2, by amending paragraph 4 to read as follows. 4, termination of availability of amounts not transferred. A, in general, any portion of a participating state's allocated amount that has not been transferred to the state under the section may be deemed by the Secretary to be no longer allocated to the state and no longer available to the state, and shall be returned to the general fund of the Treasury or reallocated as described in subparagraph B if 1, the second 1/3 of a state's allocated amount has not been transferred to the state before the end of the 3-year period beginning on the date that the Secretary approves the state for participation, or 2, the last third of a state's allocated amount has not been transferred to the state before the end of the 6-year period beginning on the date that the Secretary approves the state for participation. B, reallocation. Any amount deemed by the Secretary to no longer be allocated to a state and no longer available to such state under subparagraph A may be reallocated by the Secretary to other participating states. In making such a reallocation, the Secretary shall not take into account the minimum allocation requirements under subsection 2B2B or the specific allocation for tribal governments described under subsection B2C. B, in section 3004D, by striking date of enactment of this act, each place it appears, and inserting the date of the enactment of section 303D. C, in section 3005B, by striking date of enactment of this date, each place it appears, and inserting date of enactment of section 3003D. D, in section 3006B4, by striking date of enactment of this act and inserting date of the enactment of section 3003D. E, in section 3007B, by striking March 31, 2011, and inserting March 31, 2022. F, in section 3009, by striking date of enactment of this act, each place it appears, and inserting date of the enactment of section 3003D. And G, in section 3011B by striking date of the enactment of this act each place it appears and inserting date of the enactment of section 3003D. 2, appropriation. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is hereby appropriated to the Secretary of the Treasury for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriate, $10 billion to remain available until expended to provide support to small businesses responding to and recovering from the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, ensure business enterprises owned and controlled by socially economic disadvantaged individuals have access to credit and investments, provide technical assistance to help small businesses applying for various support programs, and to pay reasonable costs of administering such initiative. B, rescission. With respect to amounts appropriated under subparagraph A, 1, the Secretary of the Treasury shall complete all disbursements and remaining obligations before September 30th, 2030. And 2, any amounts that remain unexpended, whether obligated or unobligated, on September 30th, 2030, shall be rescinded and deposited into the general fund of the Treasury. B, additional allocations to support businesses, enterprises owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, Section 3003 of the State Small Business Credit Initiative Act of 2010, 12 U.S.C. 5702, is amended by adding at the end the following. D, additional allocations to support business enterprises owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals of the amounts appropriated for fiscal year 2021 to carry out the program. The Secretary shall, 1, allocate $1.5 billion to states from funds allocated under the section, and by regulation or other guidance prescribe program requirements that the funds be expended for business enterprises owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, and 2, allocate such amounts to states based on the needs of business enterprises owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals as determined by the Secretary in each state and not subject to the allocation formula described under subsection B. E, incentive allocations to support business enterprises owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. Of the amounts appropriated for fiscal year 2021 to carry out the program, the Secretary shall set aside $1 billion for an incentive program under which the Secretary shall increase the second, third, and last third allocations for states that demonstrate robust support as determined by the Secretary for business concerns owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals in the deployment of prior allocation amounts. C, additional allocations to support very small businesses. Section 3003 of the Small State Business Credit Initiative Act of 2010, 12 U.S.C. 5702, as amended by subsection B, is further amended by adding at the end the following. F, additional allocations to support very small businesses. 1, in general, of the amounts appropriated to carry out the program, the Secretary shall allocate not less than $500 million to states from funds allocated under the section to be expended for very small businesses. 2, very small business defined. In this subsection, the term very small business, A, means a business with fewer than 10 employees, and B, may include independent contractors and sole proprietors. D, CDFI and MDI participation plan. Section 3004 of the State Small Business Credit Initiative Act of 2010, 12 U.S.C. 5703, is amended by adding at the end of the following. E, CDFI and MDI participation plan. The Secretary may not approve a state to be a participating state unless the state has provided the Secretary with a plan detailing how minority depository institutions and community development financial institutions will be encouraged to participate in state programs. E, Pandemic Response Plan. Section 3004 of the State Small Business Credit Initiative Act of 2010, 12 U.S.C. 5703, as amended by subsection D, is further amended by adding at the end the following. F, Pandemic Response Plan. The Secretary may not approve a state to be a participating state unless the state has provided the Secretary with a description of how the state will be expeditiously utilize funds to support small businesses, including business enterprises owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, in responding to and recovering from the economic effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. F, Technical Assistance. Section 3009 of the State Small Business Credit Initiative Act of 2010, 12 U.S.C. 5708, is amended by adding at the end the following. E, Technical Assistance. Of the amounts appropriated for fiscal year 2021 to carry out the program, $500 million may be used by the Secretary to, 1, provide funds to the states to carry out a technical assistance plan, under which a state will provide legal, accounting, and financial advisory services, either directly or contracted with legal, accounting, and financial advisory firms, with priority given to business enterprises owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, to very small businesses and businesses enterprises owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals applying for A, state programs under the program, and B, other state or federal programs that support small businesses. 2, transfer amounts to the minority business development agencies so that the agency may use such amounts in a manner the agency determines appropriate, including through contracting with third parties to provide technical assistance to business enterprises owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals applying to A, state programs under the program, and B, other state or federal programs that support small business, and 3, contract with legal, accounting, and financial advisory firms with priority given to business enterprises owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals to provide technical assistance to business enterprises owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals applying to A, state programs under the program, and B, other state or federal programs that support small businesses. G, inclusion of tribal governments. Section 300210 of the State Small Business Credit Initiative Act of 2010, 12 U.S.C. 570110 is amended 1 in subparagraph C by striking and at the end 2 in subparagraph D by striking the period at the end and inserting and 3 by adding at the end of the following: E, a tribal government or a group of tribal governments that jointly apply for an allocation. H, definitions. Section 3002 of the State Small Business Credit Initiative Act of 2010, 12 U.S.C. 5701 is amended by adding at the end the following: 15 business enterprise owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. The term business enterprise owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals means a business that A, if privately owned, 51% is owned by one or more socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. B, if publicly owned, 51% of the stock is owned by one or more socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. And C, in the case of a mutual institution, a majority of the board of directors, account holders, and the community which the institution services is predominantly comprised of socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. 16, community development financial institution. The term community development financial institution has the meaning given that the term under Section 103 of the Rigel Community Development and Regulatory Improvement Act of 1994. 17, minority depository institution. The term minority depository institution has the meaning given that the term under Section 308B of the Financial Institutions Reform, Recovery, and Enforcement Act of 1989. 18, socially and economically disadvantaged individual. The term socially and economically disadvantaged individual means an individual who is socially disadvantaged individual or an economically disadvantaged individual, as such terms are defined respectively under Section 8 of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 637, and the regulations thereunder. 19, tribal government. The term tribal government means the recognized governing body of any Indian or Alaska Native tribe, band, nation, pueblo, village, community, or component band or component reservation, individually identified, including parenthetically to the list published most recently as the date of the enactment of this paragraph pursuant to Section 104 of the Federally Recognized Indian Tribe List Act of 1994, 25 U.S.C. 5131. 1, rule of application. The amendments made by this section shall apply with respect to funds appropriated under this section and funds appropriated on or after the date of enactment of this section. Subtitle D, public transportation. Section 3401, Federal Transit Administration grants. A, Federal Transit Administration appropriation. 1, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise made available, there are appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any funds in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $30,461,355,534 to remain available until September 30th, 2024, that shall A, be for grants to eligible recipients under sections 5307, 5309, 5310, and 5311 of Title 49 United States Code to prepare for, and respond to coronavirus, and B, not be subject to any prior restriction on the total amount of funds available for implementation or execution of programs authorized under sections 5307, 5310, or 5311 of such title. 2, availability of funds for operating expenses. A, in general, notwithstanding subsection A1 or B of section 5307 and section 5310B2A of Title 49 United States Codes, funds provided under this section other than subsection B4 shall be available for the operating expenses of transit agencies to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus public health emergency, including beginning on January 20th, 2020. 1, reimbursement for payroll of public transportation, including payroll and expenses of private providers of public transportation. 2, operating costs to maintain service due to lost revenue due to a result of the coronavirus public health emergency, including the purchase of personal protective equipment. And 3, paying the administrative leave of operations or contractor personnel due to reductions in service. B, use of funds. Funds described in subparagraph B 1, available for immediate obligation notwithstanding the requirement of such expenses to be included in a transportation improvement program, long-range transportation plan, statewide transportation improvement program under sections 5303 and 5304 of Title 49 United States Code. 2, directed to payroll and operations of public transportation, including payroll and expenses of private providers of public transportation, unless the recipient certifies to the administrator of the Public Transit Administration that the recipient has not furloughed any employees. 3, used to provide a federal share of the cost for any grant made under the section of 100%. B, allocation of funds. 1, urbanized area formula grants. A, in general, of the amounts made available under subsection A, $26,086,580,227 shall be for grants to recipients and subrecipients under section 5307 of Title 49 United States Code, and shall be administered as if such funds were provided under section 5307 of such title. B, allocation. Amounts made available under subparagraph A shall be appropriated to urbanized areas based on data contained in the National Transit Database such that, 1, each urbanized area shall receive an apportionment of an amount that, when combined with amounts that were otherwise made available to such urbanized area for similar activities to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus, is equal to 132% of the urbanized area's 2018 operating costs, and 2, for funds remaining after the apportionment described in clause 1, such as funds shall be apportioned such that, 1, each urbanized area that did not receive an apportionment under clause 1 shall receive an apportionment equal to 25% of the urbanized area's 2018 operating costs, and 2, each urbanized area's under clause 1, when the amounts that were otherwise made available prior to clause 1 in that urbanized area for similar activities to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus are equal to or greater than 130% of the urbanized area's 2018 operating costs, but do not exceed 132 of such costs. Such urbanized area shall receive an apportionment equal to 10% of the urban area's 2018 operating costs in addition to amounts apportioned to the urbanized area under their clause. 2, formula grants for the enhanced mobility of seniors and individuals with disabilities. A, in general, of the amounts made available under subsection A, $50 million shall be for grants to recipients or subrecipients eligible under section 5310 of Title 49 United States Code and shall be apportioned to in accordance with such section. B, allocation ratio. Amounts made available under subparagraph A shall be allocated the same ratio as funds were provided under section 5310 of Title 49 United States Code for fiscal year 2023, formula grants for rural areas. And A, in general, and the amounts made available under subsection A, $317,214,013 shall be for grants to recipients or subrecipients eligible under section 5311 of Title 49 United States Code and shall be administered as if the funds were provided under section 5311 of such title and shall be apportioned in accordance with such section except as described in paragraph B. B, allocation ratio. Amounts made available under subparagraph A to states as defined in section 5302 of Title 49 United States Code shall be allocated to such states based on data contained in the National Trust Database such that
1, any state that received an amount for similar activities to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus that is equal to or greater than 150% of the combined 2018 rural operating costs of the recipients and subrecipients in such state shall receive an amount equal to 5% of such state's 2018 rural operating costs. 2, any state that does not receive an allocation under clause 1 that received an amount for similar activities to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus that is equal to or greater than 140% of the combined 2018 rural operating costs of the recipients and subrecipients in that state shall receive an amount equal to 10% of such state's 2018 rural operating costs. And 3, any state that does not receive an allocation under clauses 1 or 2 shall receive an amount equal to 20% of such state's 2018 rural operating costs. 4, capital investments. In general, the amount available on subsection A, $1,425 million shall be for grants administered under subsections D and E of section 5309 of Title 49 United States Code. And 2, $250 million shall be for grants administered under subsection H of section 5309 of Title 49 United States Code. B, funding distribution. 1, in general, of the amounts made available in subparagraph AI, $1,250 million shall be provided to each recipient for all projects with existing full funding grant agreements that received allocations for fiscal year 2019 or 2020, except that recipients with projects open for revenue service are not eligible to receive a grant under this subparagraph. Funds shall be provided proportionally based on the non-capital investment grant share of the amount allocated. 2, allocation of the amounts made available in subparagraph A. $775 million shall be provided to each recipient for all projects with existing full funding grant agreements that received an allocation only prior to fiscal year 2019, except that projects open for revenue service are not eligible to receive a grant under this subparagraph. And no project may receive more than 40% of the amounts provided under this clause. The administrator of the Federal Transit Administration shall proportionally distribute funds in excess of such percent and to recipients for which the percent of funds does not exceed 40%. Funds shall be provided proportionally based on the non-capital investment grant share of the amount allocated. 3, eligible recipients. For amounts made available in subparagraph A2, eligible recipient shall be any recipient of an allocation under subsection H of section 5309 of Title 49 United States Code, or an applicant in the project development phase described in paragraph 2 of such subsection. 4, amounts distributed under clauses 1, 2, and 3 of subparagraph A shall be provided notwithstanding the limitation of any calculation of the maximum amount of federal financial assistance for the project under subsection K2, C2, or H7 of section 5309 of Title 49 United States Code. Section 5311F, services. A, in general, of the amounts made available under subsection A, in addition to the amounts made available under paragraph 3, $100 million shall be available for grants to recipients for bus operators that partner with recipients or subrecipients of funds under section 5311F of Title 49 United States Code. B, allocation ratio. Notwithstanding paragraph 3, the administrator of the Federal Transit Administration shall allocate amounts under subparagraph A in the same ratio as funds were provided under section 5311 of Title 49 United States Code for fiscal year 2020. C, exception. If a state or territory does not have bus providers eligible under section 5311F of Title 49 United States Code, funds under this paragraph may be used by such state or territory for any expense eligible under section 5311 of Title 49 United States Code. 6, planning. A, in general, of the amounts made available under subsection A, $25 million shall be for grants to recipients eligible under section 5307 of Title 49 United States Code for the planning of public transportation associated with the restoration of services as the coronavirus public health emergency concludes, and shall be available in accordance with such section. B, availability of funds for route planning. Amounts made available under subparagraph A shall be available for route planning designed to 1, increase ridership and reduce travel times, while maintaining or expanding the total level of vehicle revenue miles of service provided in the planning period, or 2, make service adjustments to increase the quality of frequency of service provided to low-income riders and disadvantaged neighborhoods or communities. C, limitation. Amounts made available under subparagraph A shall not be used for route planning related to transitioning public transportation service provided as of the date of receipt of funds to a transportation network company or other third-party contract provider, unless the existing provider of public transportation service is a third-party contract provider. 7, recipients and subrecipients requiring additional assistance. A, in general, of the amounts made available under subsection A, $2,207,561,294 shall be for grants to eligible recipients of subrecipients of funds under sections 5307 or 5311 of Title 49 United States Code, that as a result of COVID-19 require additional assistance for costs related to operations, personnel, cleaning and sanitation, combating the spread of pathogens on transit systems, and debt service payments incurred to maintain operations and avoid layoffs and furloughs. B, administration. Funds made available under subparagraph A shall, after allocation, be administered as if provided under paragraph 1 or 3 as applicable. C, application requirements. 1, in general, the administrator of the Federal Transit Administration may not allocate funds to an eligible recipient or subrecipient of funds under Chapter 53 of Title 49 United States Code unless the recipient provides to the administrator 1, estimates of financial need, 2, data on reductions in fare box or other source of local revenue for sustained operations, 3, a spending plan for such funds, and 4, demonstration of expenditure of greater than 90% of funds available to the applicant from funds made available for similar activities in fiscal year 2020. 2, deadlines. The administrator of the Federal Transit Administration shall, 1, not later than 180 days after the date of the enactment of this act, issue a notice of funding opportunity for assistance under this paragraph, and 2, not later than 120 days after the application deadline establishing in notice of funding opportunity under subclause 1, make awards under the paragraph to select applicants. 3, evaluation. 1, in general, applications for assistance under this paragraph shall be evaluated by the administrator of the Federal Transit Administration based on the level of financial need demonstrated by an eligible recipient or subrecipient, including projections of future financial need to maintain service as a percentage of the 2018 operating cost that has not been replaced by the funds made available to eligible recipients or subrecipient under paragraphs 1 through 5 of this subsection when combined with an amount allocated to such eligible recipient or subrecipient from funds previously made available for the operating expenses of transit agencies related to the response to the COVID-19 public health emergency. 2, restriction. Amounts made available under this paragraph shall only be available for operating expenses. 4, state applicants. A state may apply for assistance under this paragraph on behalf of an eligible recipient or subrecipient or a group of eligible recipients or subrecipients. D, unobligated funds. If amounts made available under this paragraph remain unobligated on September 30th, 2023, such amounts shall be available for any purpose eligible under Section 5307 or 5311 of Title 49 United States Code. Title 4, Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, Section 4001, Emergency Federal Employees Leave Fund. A, establishment, appropriation. There is established in the Treasury the Emergency Federal Employee Leave Fund in the section referred to as the fund, to be administered by the Director of the Office of Personnel Management. For the purpose set forth in subsection B, in addition to the amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $570 million, which shall be deposited into the fund and remain available through September 30th, 2022. The fund is available for reasonable expenses incurred by the Office of Personnel Management in administering this section. B, purpose. Amounts in the fund shall be available for reimbursement to an agency for the use of paid leave under this section by any employee of the agency who is unable to work because the employee, 1, is subject to federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19. 2, has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to concerns related to COVID-19. 3, is caring for an individual who is subject to such an order or has been so advised. 4, has experienced symptoms of COVID-19 and seeking a medical diagnosis. 5, is caring for a son or daughter of such employee if the school or place of care of the son or daughter has been closed. If the school of such son or daughter requires or makes optional a virtual learning instruction model or requires or makes optional a hybrid of in-person virtual learning instruction models, or the child care provider of such son or daughter is unavailable due to COVID-19 precautions. 6, is experience any substantially similar condition. 7, is caring for a family member with a mental or physical disability or who is 55 years of age or older and incapable of self-care without regard to whether another individual other than the employee is available to care for such family member. If the place of care for such family member is closed or the direct care provider is unavailable due to COVID-19, or 8, is obtaining immunization related to COVID-19 or is recovering from any injury, disability, illness, or condition related to such immunization. C, limitations. 1, period of availability. Paid leave under this section may only be provided to and used by an employee during the period beginning on the date of the enactment of this act and ending on September 30th, 2021. 2, total hours amount. Paid leave under this section. A, shall be provided to an employee in an amount not to exceed 600 hours of paid leave for each full-time employee, and in the case of a part-time employee, employee on an uncommon tour of duty, or employee with a seasonal work schedule, in an amount not to exceed the proportional equivalent of 600 hours to the extent amounts in the fund remain available for reimbursement. B, shall be paid at the same hourly rate as other leave payments, and C, may not be provided to an employee if the leave would result in payments greater than $2,800 in aggregate for any biweekly pay period for a full-time employee or a proportionally equivalent biweekly limit for a part-time employee. 3, relationship to other leave. Paid leave under this section, A, is the addition to any other leave provided to an employee, and B, may not be used by an employee concurrently with any other paid leave. 4, calculation of retirement benefit. Any paid leave provided to an employee under this section shall reduce the total service used to calculate any federal civilian retirement benefit. D, employee defined. In this section, the term employee means 1, an individual in the executive branch for whom annual and sick leave is provided under subchapter 1 of chapter 63 of Title V United States Code. 2, an individual employed by the United States Postal Service. 3, an individual employed by the Postal Regulatory Commission. And 4, an employee of the Public Defender Service for the District of Columbia and the District of Columbia Courts. Section 4002, funding for the Government Accountability Office. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $77 million to remain available until September 30th, 2025 for necessary expenses of the Government Accountability Office to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus and to support oversight of the coronavirus response and the funds provided in this act or any other act pertaining to the coronavirus pandemic. Section 4003, Pandemic Response Accountability Committee funding availability. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $40 million to remain available until September 30th, 2025 for the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee to support oversight of the coronavirus response and of funds provided in this act or any other act pertaining to the coronavirus pandemic. Section 4004, funding for the White House. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $12,800,000 to remain available until September 30th, 2021 for necessary expenses for the White House to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. Section 4005, Federal Emergency Management Agency appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Federal Emergency Management Agency for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $50 billion to remain available until September 30th, 2025 to carry out the purposes of the Disaster Relief Fund for costs associated with major disaster declarations. Section 4006, Funeral Assistance. A, in general, for the emergency declaration issued by the President on March 13th, 2020, pursuant to Section 501B of the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, 42 U.S.C. 5191B, and for any subsequent major disaster declaration that supersedes such emergency declaration, the President shall provide financial assistance to an individual or household to meet disaster-related funeral expenses under Section 408E1 of the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act, 42 U.S.C. 5174E1, for which the federal cost share shall be 100%. B, use of funds. Funds appropriated under Section 4005 may be used to carry out subsection A of this section. Section 4007, Emergency Food and Shelter Program funding. In addition to amounts otherwise made available, there is appropriated to the Federal Emergency Management Agency for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $400 million to remain available until September 30th, 2025 for the Emergency Food and Shelter Program. Section 4008, Humanitarian Relief. In addition to amounts otherwise made available, there is appropriated to the Federal Emergency Management Agency for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $110 million to remain available until September 30th, 2025 for the Emergency Food and Shelter Program for the purposes of providing humanitarian relief to families and individuals encountered by the Department of Homeland Security. Section 4009, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. In addition to amounts otherwise made available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $650 million to remain available until September 30th, 2023 for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency for cybersecurity risk mitigation. Section 4010, appropriation for the United States Digital Service. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $200 million to remain available until September 30th, 2024 for the United States Digital Service. Section 4011, appropriation for the Technology Modernization Fund. In addition to amounts otherwise appropriated, there is appropriated to the General Services Administration for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriate, $1 billion to remain available until September 30th, 2025 to carry out the purposes of the Technology Modernization Fund. Section 4012, appropriation for the Federal Citizen Services Fund. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the General Services Administration for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $150 million to remain available until September 30th, 2024 to carry out the purposes of the Federal Citizen Services Fund. Section 4013, AFG and the Safer Program funding. In addition to amounts otherwise made available, appropriated to the Federal Emergency Management Agency for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $300 million to remain available until September 30th, 2025, of which $100 million shall be for assistance to firefighters grants and $200 million shall be for staffing for adequate fire and emergency response grants. Section 4014, Emergency Management Performance Grant Funding. In addition to amounts otherwise made available, there is appropriated to the Federal Emergency Management Agency for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $100 million to remain available until September 30th, 2025 for emergency management performance grants. Title 5, Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship, Section 5001, Modifications to Paycheck Protection Program, A, eligibility of certain nonprofit entities for covered loans for the Paycheck Protection Program. 1, in general, Section 7A36 of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 636A36, as amended by the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Business, Nonprofits and Venues Act, Title 3 of Division N of Public Law 116-260, is amended. A, in subparagraph A, 1, in clause 15 by striking and at the end, 2, in clause 16 by striking the period at the end and inserting and 3, by adding at the end the following. 17, the term additional covered nonprofit entity. 1 means an organization described in any paragraph of Section 501C of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986, other than paragraph 3, 4, 6, or 19, and exempt from tax under 501A of such code. 2, does not include any entity that, if the entity were a business concern, would be described in Section 120.110 of Title 13, Code of Federal Regulations, or in any successor regulation or other related guidance or rule that may be issued by the administrator, other than a business concern described in paragraph A or K of such section, and B in subparagraph D, 1 in clause 3 by adding at the end the following. 3, eligibility of certain organizations subject to the provisions in this subparagraph during the covered period. A nonprofit organization shall be eligible to receive a covered loan if the nonprofit organization employs not more than 500 employees per physical location of the organization, and BB, an additional covered nonprofit entity in an organization that B for subclauses 1DD and 2DD of clauses 7 would be eligible for a covered loan under clause 7 shall be eligible to receive a covered loan if the entity or organization employs not more than 300 employees per physical location of the entity of organization, and 2, by adding at the end the following. 9, eligibility of additional covered nonprofit entities. An additional covered nonprofit entity shall be eligible to receive a covered loan if 1, the additional covered nonprofit entity does not receive more than 15% of its recipients from lobbying activities. 2, the lobbying activities of the additional covered nonprofit entity do not compromise more than 15% of the total activities of the organization. 3, the cost of the lobbying activities of the additional covered nonprofit entity did not exceed $1 million during the most recent tax of the additional covered nonprofit entity that ended prior to February 15, 2020. And 4, the additional covered nonprofit entity employs not more than 300 employees. 2, eligibility for second draw loans. Paragraph 37A1 of Section 7A of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 636A, as added by the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, Title III of Division N of Public Law 116-260, is amended by inserting additional covered nonprofit entity after the terms. B, eligibility of Internet publishing organizations for covered loans under the Paycheck Protection Program. 1, in general, Section 7A 36D of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 636A36D, as amended by subsection A, is further amended A in clause 3 by adding at the end the following. 4, eligibility of Internet publishing organizations, a business concern or other organization that was not eligible to receive a covered loan the day before the date of the enactment of this subclause is assigned a North American Industry Classification System Code of 519130, certifies in good faith as an Internet-only news publisher or Internet-only periodical publisher, and is engaged in the collection and distribution of local or regional and national news and information shall be eligible to receive a covered loan for the continued provision of news, information, content, or emergency information if AA, the business concern or organization, employs not more than 500 employees, or the size standard establishment by the administrator for the North American Industry Classification Code per physical location of the business concern or organization, and BB, the business concern or organization makes a good faith certification that proceeds of the loan will be used to support expenses at the component of the business concern or organization that supports local or regional news. B, in clause 4, 1, in subclause 3 by striking and at the end, 2, in subclause 4BB by striking the period at the end and inserting colon and 3 by adding at the end the following. 5, any business concern or other organization that was not eligible to receive a covered loan the day before the date of the enactment of this subclause is assigned a North American Industry Classification System Code of 519130, certifies in good faith as an Internet-only news publisher or Internet-only periodical publisher, and is engaged in the collection and distribution of local or regional and national news and information. If the business concern or organization AA employs not more than 500 employees, or the size standard established by the administrator for the North American Industry Classification Code per physical location of the business concern or organization, and BB is a majority owned or controlled by business concern or organization that is assigned a North American Industry Classification System Code of 519130. C, in clause 5 by striking clause 3, 2, 4, 4, or 7 and inserting subclause 2, 3, or 4, or clause 3, subclause 4, or 5, or clause 4, clause 7, or clause 9, and D in clause 8, 2, 1 by striking business concern made eligible by clause 3, 2, or clause 4, 4 of this paragraph, and inserting business concern made eligible by subclause 2 or 4, or clause 3 or subclause 4, or 5 of clause 4 of this subparagraph, and 2 by inserting or organization after business concern each place it appears. 2, eligibility for second draw loans, section 7A 37A42 of the Small Business Act, as amended by the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, Title III of Division N of Public Law 116-260, is amended by striking clause 3, 2, 4, 4, or 7, and inserting subclause 2, 3, or 4, or clause 3, subclause 4, or 5 of clause 4, clause 7, or clause 9. C, coordination with the continuation coverage premium assistance. Paycheck Protection Program. Section 7A12 of the Small Business Act, as redesignated, transferred, and amended by Section 304B of the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, Public Law 116-260, is amended A, by striking CARES Act or inserting CARES Act, and B, by inserting before the period at the end the following: or premiums taking into account and determining the credit allowed under Section 6432 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. 2, Paycheck Protection Program second draw, Section 7A37J31 of the Small Business Act, as amended by the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, Title III of Division N of Public Law 116-260, is amended A, by striking or at the end of the item AA, B, by striking the period at the end of item BB and inserting or, and C, by adding at the end the following new item.
CC, premiums taken into account in determining the credit allowed under Section 6432 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. 3, applicability. The amendments made by this subsection shall apply only with respect to applications for forgiveness of covered loans made under paragraphs 36 or 37 of Section 7A of the Small Business Act, as amended by the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, Title III of Division N of Public Law 116-260, that are received on or after the date of enactment of this act. D, commitment, authority, and appropriations. 1, commitment authority. Section 1102B1 of the CARES Act, Public Law 116-136, is amended by striking $806,450,000,000 and inserting $813,700,000,000. 2, direct appropriations. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Administrator of the Small Business Administration for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $7,250,000,000 to remain available until expended for carrying out this section. Section 5002, targeted EIDL advance. A, definitions. In this section, 1, the term administrator means the administrator of the Small Business Administration, and 2, the terms covered entity and economic loss have the meanings given the terms in Section 331A of the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, Title III of Division N of Public Law 116-260. B, appropriations. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Administrator for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $15 billion. 1, to remain available until expended, and 2, of which the Administrator shall use A, $10 billion to make payments to covered entities that have not received the full amounts to which the covered entities are entitled under Section 331 of the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, Title III of Division N of Public Law 116-260, and B, $5 billion to make payments under Section 1110E of the CARES Act, 15 U.S.C. 9009E, each of which shall be 1, made to a covered entity that 1, has suffered an economic loss of greater than 50%, and 2, employs not more than 10 employees. 2, in an amount that is $5,000, and 3, with respect to the covered entity to which the payment is made, in addition to any payment made to the covered entity under Section 1110E of the CARES Act, 15 U.S.C. 9009E, or Section 331 of the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, Title III of Division N of Public Law 116-260. Section 5003, support for restaurants. A, definitions. In this section, 1, administrator. The administrator means the administrator of the Small Business Administration. 2, affiliated business. The term affiliated business means a business in which an eligible entity has an equity or right to profit distributions of not less than 50%, or in which an eligible entity has the contractual authority to control the direction of the business, provided that such affiliation shall be determined as of any arrangements or agreements in existence as of March 13th, 2020. 3, covered period. The term covered period means the period A, beginning on February 15th, 2020, and B, ending on December 31st, 2021, or a date to be determined by the administrator that is not later than 2 years after the date of enactment of this section. 4, eligible entity. The term eligible entity, A, means a restaurant, food stand, food truck, food cart, caterer, saloon, inn, tavern, bar, lounge, brew pub, tasting room, tap room, licensed facility, or premise of a beverage alcohol producer where the public may taste, sample, or purchase products, or other similar place of business in which the public or patrons assemble for the primary purpose of being served food or drink. B, includes an entity described in subparagraph A that is located in an airport terminal or that is tribally owned concern. And C, does not include 1, an entity described in subparagraph A that 1, is a state or local government operated business, 2, as of March 13, 2020, owns or operates together with any affiliated business more than 20 locations, regardless of whether those locations do business under the same or multiple names, or 3, has a pending application for or has received a grant under Section 324 of the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, Title III of Division N of Public Law 116-260, or 2, a publicly traded company. 5, exchange, issuer, security. The terms exchange, issuer, and security have the meanings given those terms in Section 3A of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, 15 U.S.C. 78 CA. 6. Fund. The term fund means the Restaurant Revitalization Fund established under subsection B. 7. Pandemic-related revenue loss. The term pandemic-related revenue loss means with respect to an eligible entity, A, except as provided in subparagraphs B, C, and D, the gross receipts as established using such verification documentation as the administrator may require of the eligible entity during 2020, subtracted from the gross receipts of the eligible entity in 2019, if such sum is greater than 0. B, if the eligible entity was not in operation for the entirety of 2019, 1, the difference between 1, the product obtained by multiplying the average monthly gross receipts of the eligible entity in 2019 by 12, and 2, the product obtained by multiplying the average monthly gross receipts of the eligible entity in 2020 by 12, or 2, an amount based on a formula determined by the administrator. C, if the eligible entity opened during the period beginning on January 1, 2020, and ending on the day before the date of enactment of this section, 1, the expenses described in subsection C5A that were incurred by the eligible entity minus any gross receipts received, or 2, an amount based on a formula determined by the administrator. Or D, if the eligible entity has not yet opened as of the date of application for a grant under subsection C, but has incurred expenses described in subsection C5A as of the date of enactment of the section, 1, the amount of those expenses, or 2, an amount based on a formula determined by the administrator. For purposes of this paragraph, the pandemic-related revenue losses for an eligible entity shall be reduced to any amounts received from a covered loan made under paragraph 36 or 37 of section 7A of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 636A in 2020 or 2021. 8. Payroll costs. The term payroll cost has the meaning given the term in section 7A 36A of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 636A 36A, except that such term shall not include A, qualified wages as defined in subsection C3 of section 2301 of the CARES Act, taken into account in determining the credit allowed under such section 2301, or B, premiums taken into account in determining the credit allowed under section 6432 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986. 9, publicly traded company. The term publicly traded company means an entity that is majority owned or controlled by an entity that is an issuer, the securities of which are listed on a national securities exchange under Section 6 of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, 15 U.S.C. 78F. 10, tribally owned concern. The term tribally owned concern has the meaning given the term in Section 124.3 of Title 13 Code of Federal Regulations or any successor regulation. B, Restaurant Revitalization Fund. 1, in general, there is established in the Treasury of the United States a fund to be known as the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. 2, appropriations. A, in general. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Restaurant Revitalization Fund for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $25 billion to remain available until expended. B, distribution. 1, in general, of the amounts made available under subparagraph A, 1, $5 billion shall be made available to eligible entities with gross receipts during 2019 of not more than $500,000, and 2, $20 billion shall be available to the administrator to award grants under subsection C in an equitable manner to eligible entities of different sizes based on annual gross receipts. 2, adjustments. The administrator may make adjustments as necessary to the distribution of funds under clause 1(2) based on demand and the relative local costs in the market in which eligible entities operate. C, grants after initial period, notwithstanding subparagraph B, on and after the date that is 60 days after the date of enactment of this section or another period of time determined by the administrator may make grants using amounts appropriated under subparagraph A to any eligible entity regardless of the annual gross receipts of the eligible entity. 3, use of funds. The administrator shall use amounts in the fund to make grants described in subsection C. C, restaurant revitalization grants. 1, in general, except as provided in subsection B and paragraph 3, the administrator shall award grants to eligible entities in the order in which applications are received by the administrator. 2, application. A, certification. An eligible entity applying for a grant under this subsection shall make a good faith certification that 1, the uncertainty of current economic conditions makes necessary the grant request to support the ongoing operations of the eligible entity, and 2, The eligible entity has not yet applied for or received a grant under Section 324 of the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits and Venues Act, Title III of Division N of Public Law 116-260. B, business identifiers. In accepting applications for grants under this subsection, the administrator shall prioritize the ability of each applicant to use their existing business identifiers over requiring other forms of registration or identification that may not be common in their industry and imposing additional burdens on applicants. 3, priority in awarding grants. A, in general. During the initial 21-day period in which the administrator awards grants under this subsection, the administrator shall prioritize awarding grants to eligible entities that are small business concerns owned and controlled by women as defined in Section 3N of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 632N, small business concerns owned and controlled by veterans as defined in Section 3Q of such Act, 15 U.S.C. 632Q, or socially and economically disadvantaged small business concerns as defined in Section 8A4A of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 637A4A. The administrator may take such steps as necessary to ensure that eligible entities described in this subparagraph have access to grant funding under this section after the end of such 21-day period. B, certification. For purposes of establishing priority under paragraph A, an applicant shall submit a self-certification of eligibility for priority with the grant application. 4, grant amount. A, aggregate maximum amount. The aggregate amount of grants made to an eligible entity and any affiliated businesses of the eligible entity under this subsection 1 shall not exceed $10 million, and 2 shall be limited to $5 million per physical location of the eligible entity. B, determination of grant amount. 1, in general, except as provided in this paragraph, the amount of a grant made to an eligible entity under this subsection shall be equal to the pandemic-related revenue loss of the eligible entity. 2, return to Treasury. Any amount of a grant made under this subsection to an eligible entity based on estimated receipts that is greater than the actual gross receipts of the eligible entity in 2020 shall be returned to the Treasury. 5, use of funds. During the covered period, an eligible entity that receives a grant under this subsection may use the grant funds for the following expenses incurred as a direct result of or during the COVID-19 pandemic. A, payroll costs. B, payment of principals or interest on any mortgage obligation, which shall not include any prepayment of principal on a mortgage obligation. C, rent payments, including rent under a lease agreement, which shall not include any prepayment of rent. D, utilities. E, maintenance expenses, including 1, construction to accommodate outdoor seating, and 2, walls, floors, deck surfaces, furniture, fixtures, and equipment. F, supplies, including protective equipment and cleaning materials. G, food and beverage expenses that are within the scope of normal business practice of the eligible entity before the covered period. H, covered supplier costs as defined in Section 7AA of the Small Business Act as redesignated, transferred, and amended by Section 304B of the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, Public Law 116-260. I, operational expenses. J, paid sick leave. K, any other expenses that the administrator determines to be essential to maintaining the eligible entity. 6, returning funds. If an eligible entity that receives a grant under this subsection fails to use all grant funds or permanently ceases operations on or before the last day of the covered period, the eligible entity shall return to the Treasury any funds that the eligible entity did not use for the allowable expenses under paragraph 5. Section 5004, Community Navigator Pilot Program. A, definitions. In this section 1, administration. The term administration means the Small Business Administration. 2, administrator. The term administrator means the administrator of the Small Business Administration. 3, Community Navigator Services. The term Community Navigator Services means the outreach, education, and technical assistance provided by community navigators that target eligible businesses to increase awareness of and participation in programs of the Small Business Administration. 4, Community Navigator. The term Community Navigator means a community organization, community financial institution, as defined in Section 7A 36A of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 636A 36A, or other private nonprofit organization engaged in the delivery of community navigator services. 5, eligible business. The term eligible business means any small business concern with priority for small business concerns owned and controlled by women as defined in Section 3N of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 632N, small business concerns owned and controlled by veterans as defined in Section 3Q of such Act, 15 U.S.C. 632Q, and socially and economically disadvantaged small business concerns as defined in Section 8A4A of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 637A4A. 6. Private nonprofit organization. The term private nonprofit organization means an entity that is described in Section 501C of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 and exempt from tax under Section 501A of such code. 7. Resource partner. The term resource partner means a small business development center as defined in Section 3 of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 632. B, a women's business center as described in Section 29 of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 656, and C, a chapter of the Service Corps of Retired Executives as defined in Section 8B1B of the Act, 15 U.S.C. 637B1B. 8, small business concern. The term small business concern has the meaning given under Section 3 of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 632. 9, state. The term state means a state of the United States, the District of Columbia, the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, American Samoa, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, and Guam, or an agency, instrumentality, or fiscal agent thereof. 10, unit of general local government. The term unit of general local government means a county, city, town, village, or other general purpose political subdivision of a state. B, community navigator pilot program. 1, in general, the administrator of the Small Business Administration shall establish a community navigator pilot program to make grants to and or enter into contracts or cooperative agreements with private nonprofit organizations, resource partners, states, tribes, and units of local government to ensure the delivery of free community navigator services to current or prospective owners of eligible businesses in order to improve access to assistance programs and resources made available because of the COVID-19 pandemic by federal, state, tribal, and local entities. 2, appropriations. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the administrator for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $100 million to remain available until September 30, 2022 for carrying out this subsection. C, outreach and education. 1, promotion. The administrator shall develop and implement a program to promote community navigator services to current or prospective owners of eligible businesses. 2, call center. The administrator shall establish a telephone hotline to offer information about federal programs to assist eligible businesses and offer referral services to resource partners, community navigators, potential lenders, and other persons that the administrator determines appropriate for current or prospective owners of eligible businesses. 3, outreach. The administrator shall A, conduct outreach and education in the 10 most commonly spoken languages in the United States to current or prospective owners of eligible businesses on community navigator services and other federal programs to assist eligible businesses. B, improve the website of the administration to describe such community navigator services and other federal programs. And C, implement an education campaign by advertising in media targeted to current or prospective owners of eligible businesses. 4, appropriations. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the administrator for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $75 million to remain available until September 30, 2022 for carrying out this subsection. D, sunset. The authority of the administrator to make grants under this section shall terminate on December 31, 2025. Section 5005, shuttered venue operators. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $1,250 million to remain available until expended to carry out Section 324 of the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, Title III of Division N of Public Law 116-260, of which $500,000 shall be used to provide technical assistance to help applicants access the system for award management or any successor thereto, or to assist applicants with an alternative grant application system. B, reduction of shuttered venues, assistance for new PPP recipients. Section 324 of the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, Title III of Division N of Public Law 116-260 is amended. 1, in subsection A1A6A by striking subclause 3, B by redesignating subclause 4 as subclause 3, and C in subclause 3 as so redesignated by striking subclauses 1, 2, and 3 and inserting subclauses 1 and 2 in subsection C1. Thank you.
A in subparagraph A, in the matter preceding clause 1 by striking A grant and inserting subject to subparagraphs B and C, A grant, and B by adding at the end the following. C, reduction for recipients of new PPP loans. 1, in general, the otherwise applicable amount of a grant under subsection B2 to an eligible person or entity shall be reduced by the total amount of loans guaranteed under paragraph 36 or 37 of section 7A of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 636A that are received on or after December 27, 2020 by the eligible person or entity. 2, application to governmental entities for purposes of applying 1, to an eligible person or entity owned by a state or a political subdivision of a state. The relevant entity 1 shall be the eligible person or entity, and 2 should not include entities of the state or political subdivision other than the eligible person or entity. Section 5006, direct appropriations in general. The addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the administrator for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the treasury not otherwise appropriated to remain available until expended. 1, $840 million for administrative expenses, including to prevent, prepare for, and respond to the COVID-19 pandemic domestically or internationally, including administrative expenses related to subparagraphs 36 and 37 of Section 7A of the Small Business Act, Section 324 of the Economic Aid to Hard-Hit Small Businesses, Nonprofits, and Venues Act, Title III, a Division N of Public Law 116-260, Section 5002 of this title, and Section 5003 of this title, and 2, $460 million to carry out the disaster loan program authorized by Section 7B of the Small Business Act, 15 U.S.C. 636B, of which $70 million shall be for the cost of direct loans authorized by such section, and $390 million shall be for administrative expenses to carry out such program. B, Inspector General. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Inspector General of the Small Business Administration for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $25 million to remain available until expended for necessary expenses of the Office of Inspector General. Title VI, Committee on Environment and Public Works, Section 6001, Economic Adjustment Assistance. A, Economic Development Administration appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $3 billion to remain available until September 30, 2022 to the Department of Commerce for Economic Adjustment Assistance as authorized by Sections 209 and 703 of the Public Works and Economic Development Act of 1965, 42 U.S.C. 3149 and 3233 to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus, and for necessary expenses for responding to economic injury as a result of coronavirus. The fund provided by this section, up to 2% shall be used for federal costs to administer such assistance utilizing temporary federal personnel as may be necessary, consistent with the requirements applicable to such administrative funding in fiscal year 2020 to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus, and which shall remain available until September 30, 2027. C, of the funds provided by this section, 25% shall be for assistance to states and communities that have suffered economic injury as a result of job and gross domestic product losses in the travel, tourism, or outdoor recreation sectors. Section 6002, funding for pollution and disparate impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. A, in general, in addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated to the Environmental Protection Agency for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $100 million to remain available until expended to address health outcome disparities from pollution of the COVID-19 pandemic, of which 1, $50 million shall be for grants, contracts, and other agency activities that identify and address disproportionate environmental or public health harms and risks in minority populations or low-income populations under A, Section 103B of the Clean Air Act, 42 U.S.C. 7403B. B, Section 1442 of the Safe Drinking Water Act, 42 U.S.C. 300J-1. C, Section 104K7A of the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act of 1980, 42 U.S.C. 9604 K7A, and D, Section 791 through 797 in the Environmental Policy Act of 2005, 42 U.S.C. 16131 through 16137, And 2, $50 million shall be for grants and activities authorized under subsections A through C of Section 103 of the Clean Air Act, 42 U.S.C. 7403, and grants and activities authorized under Section 105 of such Act, 42 U.S.C. 7405. B, administration of funds. 1, of the funds made available pursuant to subsection A1 of the administrator shall reserve 2% of administrative costs necessary to carry out activities funded pursuant to such subsection. 2, of the funds made available pursuant to subsection A2, the administrator shall reserve 5% for activities funded pursuant to subsection other than grants. Section 6003, United States Fish and Wildlife Service. A, inspection, interdiction, and research related to certain species in COVID-19. In addition to amounts otherwise made available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $95 million to remain available until expended to carry out the provisions of the Fish and Wildlife Act of 1956, 16 U.S.C. 742A, and the Fish and Wildlife Coordination Act, 16 U.S.C. 661, through direct expenditure contracts and grants, of which $20 million shall be for wildlife inspections, interdictions, investigations, and related activities and for efforts to address wildlife trafficking. 2, $30 million shall be for the care of captive species listed under the Endangered Species Act of 1973 and for the care of rescued and confiscated wildlife and for the care of federal trust species and facilities experiencing lost revenues due to COVID-19. And 3, $45 million shall be for research and extension activities to strengthen early detection, rapid response, and science-based management to address wildlife disease outbreaks before they become pandemics and strengthen capacity for wildlife health monitoring to enhance early detection of diseases that have the capacity to jump the species barrier and pose a risk in the United States, including the development of a national wildlife disease database. B, Lacey Act provisions. In addition to amounts otherwise made available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated $10 million to remain available until expended to carry out the provisions of Section 42A of Title 18 United States Code and the Lacey Act amendments of 1981, 16 U.S.C. 3371 through 3378 to identify and designate wildlife species or larger taxonomic groups of species as injurious under such provisions if they transmit a pathogen that could potentially pose a risk to human health, and develop regulations to develop a process to make emergency listings for injurious species. Title 7, Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, Subtitle A, Transportation and Infrastructure, Section 7101, grants to the National Railroad Passenger Corporation. A, Northeast Corridor appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $970,388,160 to remain available until September 30, 2024 for grants as authorized under Section 101A of the FAST Act, Public Law 114-94, to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. B, National Network appropriation. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $729,611,840 to remain available until September 30, 2024 for grants as authorized under Section 11101B of the FAST Act, Public Law 114-94, to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. C, long-distance service restoration and employee recalls, not less than $165,926,000 of the aggregate amounts made available under subsections A and B shall be for use by the National Railroad Passenger Corporation to 1, restore, not later than 90 days after the date of enactment of this act, the frequency of rail service as long-distance routes as defined in Section 24102 of Title 49 United States Code, that the National Railroad Passenger Corporation reduce the frequency of on or after July 1, 2020, and continue to operate such service at such frequency, and 2, recall and manage employees furloughed on or after October 1, 2020, as a result of efforts to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. D, use of funds in lieu of capital payments. Not less than $109,805,000 of the aggregate amounts made available under subsections A and B, 1, shall be for the use of by the National Railroad Passenger Corporation in lieu of capital payments from states and commuter rail passenger transportation providers that are subject to the cost allocation policy under Section 24905C of Title 49 United States Code, and 2, notwithstanding Sections 24319G and 24905C1A1 of Title 49 United States Code, such amounts do not constitute cross-subsidization of commuter rail passenger transportation. E, use of funds for state payments for state-supported routes. 1, in general, Of the amounts made available under subsection B, 174,850,000 shall be for use by the National Railroad Passenger Corporation to offset amounts required to be paid by states for covered state-supported routes. 2, funding share. The share of funding provided under paragraph 1 with respect to a covered state-supported route shall be distributed as follows. A, each covered state-supported route shall receive 7% of the cost allocated to the route in fiscal year 2019 under the cost allocation methodology adopted pursuant to Section 209 of the Passenger Rail Investment and Improvement Act of 2008, Public Law 110-432. B, any remaining amounts under the distribution described in subparagraph A shall be apportioned to each covered state-supported route in proportion to the passenger revenue of such route and other revenue allocated to such route in fiscal year 2019 divided by the total passenger revenue and other revenue allocated to all covered state-supported routes in fiscal year 2019. 3, covered state-supported route defined. In this subsection, the term covered state-supported route means a state-supported route. As such term is defined in Section 24102 of Title 49 United States Code, but does not include a state-supported route for which service was terminated on or before February 1, 2020. F, use of funds for debt repayment or prepayment not more than $100,885,000 of the aggregate amount made available under subsections A and B shall be 1, for the repayment or prepayment of debt incurred by the National Railroad Passenger Corporation under financing arrangements entered into prior to the date of enactment of this act, and 2, to pay required reserves, costs, and fees related to such debt, including for loans from the Department of Transportation and loans that would otherwise have been paid from National Railroad Passenger Corporation revenues. G, project management oversight. Not more than $2 million of the aggregate amounts made available under subsections A and B shall be for activities authorized under sections 11101C of the FAST Act, Public Law 114-94. Section 7102, relief for airports. A, in general. 1, in general. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any funds in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $8 billion to remain available until September 30, 2024 for assistance to sponsors of airports as such terms are defined in Section 47102 of Title 49 United States Code to be made available to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus. 2, requirements and limitations. Amounts made available under this section A may not be used for any purpose not directly related to the airport, and B, may not be provided to any airport that was allocated in excess of 4 years of operating funds to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus in fiscal year 2020. B, allocations. The following terms shall apply to the amounts made available under this section. 1, operating expenses and debt service payment. A, in general, not more than $6,492,000,000 shall be made available for primary airports as such term is defined in Section 47102 of Title 49 United States Code, and certain cargo airports for costs related to operations, personnel, cleaning, sanitation, janitorial services, combating the spread of pathogens at the airport, and debt service payments. B, distribution. Amounts made available under this paragraph. 1, should not be subject to the reduced apportionments under Section 47114F of Title 49 United States Code. 2, shall first be apportioned as set forth in Sections 47114C1A, 47114C1C1, 47114C1C2, 47114C2A, 47114C2B, and 47114C2E of Title 49 United States Code. And 3, should not be subject to a maximum apportionment limit set forth in Section 47114C1B of Title 49 United States Code. C, remaining amounts. Any amount remaining after distribution under said paragraph B shall be distributed to the sponsor of each primary airport as such term is defined in Section 47102 of Title 49 United States Code, based on each such primary airport's passenger enplanements compared to the total passenger enplanements of all such primary airports in calendar year 2019. 2, federal share for development projects. A, in general, not more than $608 million allocated under subsection A1 shall be available to pay a federal share of 100% of the cost for any grant awarded in fiscal year 2021 or in fiscal year 2020 with less than 100% federal share for an airport development project, as such term is defined in Section 47102 of Title 49. B, remaining amounts. Any amount remaining under this paragraph shall be distributed as described in paragraph 1C. 3, non-primary airports. A, in general, not more than $100 million shall be made available for general aviation and commercial service airports that are not primary airports, as such terms are defined in Section 47102 of Title 49 United States Code for costs related to operations, personnel, cleaning, sanitation, janitorial services, combating the spread of pathogens at the airport, and debt service payments. B, distribution. Amounts made available under this paragraph shall be apportioned to each non-primary airport based on the categories published in the most current National Plan of Integrated Airport Systems, reflecting the percentage of the aggregate published eligible development costs of such for each such category, and then dividing the allocated funds evenly among the eligible airports in such category, rounding up to the nearest $1,000. C, remaining amounts. Any amount remaining under this paragraph shall be distributed as described in paragraph 1C for airport concessions. A, in general, not more than $800 million shall be made available for sponsors of primary airports to provide relief from rent and minimum annual guarantees to airport concessions, of which at least $640 million shall be made available to provide relief to eligible small airport concessions, and of which at least $160 million shall be available to provide relief to eligible large airport concessions located at primary airports. B, distribution. The amounts made available for each set aside in this paragraph shall be distributed to the sponsor of each primary airport as such term is defined in Section 47102 of Title 49 United States Code, based on each such primary airport's passenger enplanements compared to the total passenger enplanements of all such primary airports in calendar year 2019. C, conditions. As a condition of approving a grant under this paragraph, 1, the sponsor shall provide such relief from the date of enactment of this act until the sponsor has provided relief equaling the total grant amount to the extent practicable and to the extent permissible under state laws, local laws, and applicable trust indentures. And 2, for each set aside, the sponsor shall provide relief from rent and minimum annual guarantee obligations to each eligible airport concession in an amount that reflects each eligible airport concession's proportional share of the total amount of the rent and minimum annual guarantees of those eligible airport concessions at such airport. C, administration. 1, administrative expenses. The administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration may retain up to 0.1% of the funds provided under this section to fund the award of and oversight by the administrator of grants made under this section. 2, workforce retention requirements. A, required retention. As a condition for receiving funds provided under this section, an airport shall continue to employ through September 30, 2021, at least 90% of the number of individuals employed after making adjustments for retirements or voluntary employee separations by the airport as of March 27, 2020. B, waiver of retention requirement. The secretary shall waive the workforce retention requirement if the secretary determines that 1, the airport has experienced economic hardship as a direct result of the requirement, or 2, the requirement reduces aviation safety or security. C, exception. The workforce retention requirement shall not apply to non-hub airports or non-primary airports receiving funds under this section. D, noncompliance. Any financial assistance provided under this section to an airport that fails to comply with the workforce retention requirement described in subparagraph A and does not otherwise qualify for a waiver or exception under this paragraph shall be subject to clawback by the secretary. D, definitions. In this section, 1, eligible large airport concession. The term eligible large airport concession means a concession as defined in Section 23.3 of Title 49 Code of Federal Regulations that is in terminal and has maximum gross receipts averaged over the previous 3 fiscal years of more than $56,420,000. 2, eligible small airport concession. The term eligible small airport concession means a concession as defined in Section 23.3 of Title 49 Code of Federal Regulations that is in terminal and a small business with maximum gross receipts averaged over the previous 3 fiscal years of less than $56,420,000, or B, as a joint venture as defined in Section 23.3 of Title 49 Code of Federal Regulations. Section 7103, Emergency FAA Employee Leave Fund. A, establishment appropriation. There was established in the Federal Aviation Administration the Emergency FAA Employee Leave Fund, in this section referred to as the fund, to be administered by the Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration for the purposes set forth in subsection B. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there was appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $9 million, which shall be deposited into the fund and remain available through September 30, 2022. B, purpose. Amounts in the fund shall be available to the Administrator for the use of paid leave under this section by any employee of the administration who is unable to work because the employee, 1, is subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19, 2, has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to concerns related to COVID-19, 3, is caring for an individual who is subject to such an order or has so been advised, 4, is experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 and seeking a medical diagnosis, 5, is caring for a son or daughter of such employee if the school or place of care of the son or daughter has been closed, if the school of such son or daughter requires or makes optional a virtual learning instruction model, or requires or makes optional a hybrid or in-person and individual learning instruction models or the child care provider of such son or daughter is unavailable due to COVID-19 precautions. 6 is experiencing any other substantially similar condition. 7 is caring for a family member with a mental or physical disability who is 55 years of age or older and incapable of self-care, without regard to whether another individual other than the employee is available to care for such family member if the place of care for such family member is closed or the direct care provider is unavailable due to COVID-19. Or 8 is obtaining immunization related to COVID-19 or is recovering from an injury, disability, illness, or condition related to such immunization. Through C, limitations. 1, period of availability. Paid leave under this section may only be provided to and used by an employee of the administration during the period beginning on the date of enactment of this section and ending on September 30, 2021. 2, total hours amount. Paid leave under this section. A, shall be provided to an employee of the administration in an amount not to exceed 600 hours of paid leave for each full-time employee, and in the case of a part-time employee on an uncommon tour of duty or employee with a seasonal work schedule, in an amount not to exceed the proportional equivalent of 600 hours to the extent amounts in the fund remain available for reimbursement. B, shall be paid at the same hourly rate as other leave payments, and C, may not be provided to an employee if the leave would result in payments greater than $2,800 in aggregate for any biweekly pay period for a full-time employee or a proportionally equivalent biweekly limit for a part-time employee. C, relationship to other leave. Paid leave under this section. A, is in addition to any other leave provided to an employee of the administration, and B, may not be used by an employee of the administration concurrently with any other paid leave. 4, calculation of retirement benefit. Any paid leave provided to an employee of the administration under this section shall reduce the total service used to calculate any federal civilian retirement benefit. Section 7104, Emergency TSA Employee Leave Fund. A, establishment appropriation. There is established in the Transportation Security Administration, in this section referred to as the administration, the Emergency TSA Employee Leave Fund, in this section referred to as the fund, to be administered by the administrator of the administration for the purposes set forth in subsection B. In addition to amounts otherwise available, there is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of any money in the Treasury not otherwise appropriated, $13 million, which shall be deposited into the fund and remain available through September 30, 2022. Purpose. B, purpose. Amounts in the fund shall be available to the administration for the use of paid leave under this section by any employee of the administration who is unable to work because the employee, 1, is subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19.
2, has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to concerns related to COVID-19. 3, is caring for an individual who's subject to such an order or has been so advised. 4, is experiencing symptoms of COVID-19 and seeking a medical diagnosis. 5, is caring for a son or daughter of such employee if the school or place of care of the son or daughter has been closed. If the school such son or daughter requires or makes an optional virtual learning instruction model, or requires or makes optional a hybrid of in-person and virtual learning instruction models, or the child care provider of such son or daughter is unavailable due to COVID-19 precautions. 6, is experiencing any other substantially similar condition. 7, is caring for a family member with a mental or physical disability who is 55 years of age or older and incapable of self-care, without regard to whether another individual other than the employee is available to care for such family member if the place of care of such family member is closed or the direct care provider is unavailable due to COVID-19. Or 8, is obtaining immunization related to COVID-19 or is recovering from any injury, disability, illness, or condition related to such immunization. C, limitations. 1, period of availability. Paid leave under this section may only be provided to and used by an employee of the administration during the period beginning on the date of enactment of this section and ending on September 30th, 2021. 2, total hours, amount. Paid leave under this section. A, shall be provided to an employee of the administration in an amount not to exceed 600 hours of paid leave for each full-time employee, and in the case of a part-time employee, employees on a common tour of duty or employee within a seasonal work schedule in an amount not to exceed the proportional equivalent of 600 hours to the extent amounts in the fund remain available for reimbursement. B, shall be paid at the same hourly rate as other leave payments, and C, may not be provided to an employee if the leave would result in payments greater than $2,800 in aggregate for any biweekly pay period for a full-time employee or a proportionately equivalent biweekly limit for a part-time employee. 3, relationship to other leave. Paid leave under this section. A, is in addition to any other leave provided to an employee of the administration, and B, may not be used by an employee of the administration concurrently with any other paid leave. 4, calculation of retirement benefit. Any paid leave provided to an employee of the administration under this section shall reduce the total service used to calculate any federal civilian retirement benefit. Subtitle B, Aviation Manufacturing Jobs Protection. Section 7201, Definitions. In the subtitle, 1, Eligible Employee Group. The term eligible employee group means the portion of the employee's United States workforce that A, does not exceed 25% of the employer's total United States workforce as of April 1st, 2020, and B, contains only employees with a total compensation level of $200,000 or less per year, and C, is engaged in aviation manufacturing activities and services or maintenance, repair, and overhaul activities and services. 2, Aviation Manufacturing Company. The term aviation manufacturing company means a corporation, firm, or other business entity, A, that 1, actively manufactures an aircraft engine, propeller, or a component, part, or systems of an aircraft or aircraft engine under a Federal Aviation Administration production approval. 2, holds certificate issued under Part 145 of Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations for maintenance, repair, and overhaul of aircraft engines, components, or propellers, or 3, operates a process certified to SAE AS 9100 related to the design, development, or provision of an aviation product or service, including a part, component, or assembly. B, which is 1, is established, created, or organized in the United States or under the laws of the United States, and 2, has significant operations in a majority of its employees engaged in aviation manufacturing activities and services, or maintenance, repair, and overhaul activities and services based in the United States. C, which has involuntary furloughed or laid off at least 10% of its workforce in 2020 as compared to 2019, or has experienced at least 15% decline in 2020 revenues as compared to 2019. D, that, as supported by sworn financial statements or other appropriate data, has identified the eligible employee group and the amount of total compensation level for the eligible employee group. E, that agrees to provide private contributions and maintain the total compensation level for the eligible employee group for the duration of an agreement under the subtitle. F, that agrees to provide immediate notice and justification to the Secretary of involuntary furloughs or layoffs exceeding 10% of the workforce that is not included in an eligible employee group for the duration of an agreement and receipt of public contributions under the subtitle. G, that has not conducted involuntary furloughs or reduced pay rates or benefits for the eligible employee group subject to the employer's rights to discipline or terminate an employee in accordance with employer policy between the date of application and the date on which a corporation, firm, or other business entity enters into an agreement with the Secretary under the subtitle. And H, that 1, in the case of a corporation, firm, or other business entity, including any parent company or subsidiary of a corporation, firm, or other business entity that holds any type of production certificate or similar authorization issued under Section 44704 of Title 49 United States Code with respect to a transport category airplane covered under Part 25 of Title 14 Code of Federal Regulations certificated with a passenger seating capacity of 50 or more, agrees to refrain from conducting an involuntary layoffs or furloughs or reducing pay rates and benefits for the eligible employee group, subject to the employer's right to discipline or terminate the employee in accordance with employer policy from the date of agreement until September 30th, 2021, or the duration of the agreement and receipt of public contributions under the subtitle, whichever period ends later, or 2, in the case of corporation, firm, or other business entity not specified under subparagraph 1, agrees to refrain from conducting involuntary layoffs or furloughs or reducing pay rates and benefits for eligible employee group subject to the employer's right to discipline or terminate an employee in accordance with employer policy for the duration of the agreement and receipt of public contributions under this title. 3, employee. The term employee has a meaning given that term in Section 3 of the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, 29 U.S.C. 203. 4, employer. The term employer means an aviation manufacturing company that is an employer as defined in Section 3 of the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938, 29 U.S.C. 203. 5, private contribution. The term private contribution means a contribution funded by the employer under this subtitle to maintain 50% of the eligible employee group's total compensation level, and combined with the public contribution is sufficient to maintain the total compensation level for the eligible employee group as of April 1st, 2020. 6, public contribution. The term public contribution means a contribution funded by the federal government under the subtitle to provide 50% of the eligible employees group's total compensation level, and combined with the private contribution is sufficient to maintain the total compensation level for those in the eligible employee group as of April 1st, 2020. 7, secretary. The term secretary means the Secretary of Transportation. 8, total compensation level. The term total compensation level means the level of total base compensation and benefits provided to an eligible employee group employee, excluding overtime and premium pay and excluding any federal, state, or local payroll taxes paid as of April 1st, 2020. Section 7202 Payroll Support Program. A, in general, the Secretary shall establish a payroll support program and enter into agreements with employers who have met the eligibility criteria specified in subsection B and are not ineligible under subsection C to provide public contributions to supplement compensation of an eligible employee group. There is appropriated for fiscal year 2021 out of amounts in the Treasury otherwise appropriated $3 billion to remain available until September 30th, 2023 for the Secretary to carry out the payroll support program authorized under the preceding sentence for which 1% of the funds may be used for implementation costs and administrative expenses. B, eligibility. The Secretary shall enter into an agreement and provide public contributions for a term no longer than 6 months solely with an employer that agrees to use the funds received under an agreement exclusively for the continuation of employee wages, salaries, and benefits to maintain the total compensation level for the eligible employee group as of April 1st, 2020, for the duration of the agreement and to facilitate the retention, rehire, or recall of employees of the employer, except that such funds may not be used for back pay of returning, rehired, or recalled employees. C, ineligibility. The Secretary may not enter into any agreement under this section with an employer who was allowed a credit under Section 2301 of the CARES Act, 26 U.S.C. 3111, note for the immediately preceding calendar quarter ending before such agreement is entered into, who receive financial assistance under Section 41113 of the CARES Act, 15 U.S.C. 9073, or who is currently expending financial assistance under the Paycheck Protection Program established under Section